All right. Welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I am A's Philosophy, and during this stream, we are going to get into. We are going to get into an open discussion. Hopefully, depending on whether people want to participate, obviously. But before we do that, as usual, I'm going to just kind of review some things, talk about some things, and shortly there, in a short matter of time, we're going to post the link and see if anyone wants to get a conversation going. Before we do that, I just want to say, first of all, I've been having audio issues on my YouTube channel. It's just obviously a very low production outfit because it's just me doing things in my free time. I feel like if I really put my mind to it, I'd try to fix all these things and get a new laptop, but really the way I've been doing things has kind of just been sufficient for my purposes. So, but I understand people who are watching my videos have been complaining about audio issues, especially when I play YouTube videos. And maybe we'll try and fix that tonight. I don't know. Take a little time to do that, or maybe I'll do it another time. I don't know. But it is. I know it is an issue, and I kind of wanted to review my channel a little bit, just so people. Sometimes I do this from time to time, just so people are aware of what I have to offer. So we are going to do that real quick. So I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit here. Here's my YouTube channel. I also have a Substack, which I don't really write all that often on the Substack, so there isn't a lot going on there right now. I think what I'm going to do is, if my channel grows, which I'm not really trying to grow it, so that probably won't happen, I might go to the Substack a little more often because I have a lot of things that I want to put down in writing instead of in video format, because I feel like some people like videos and some people just like an article. I personally like to read articles. I would much rather read an article than watch a YouTube I would rather read like a 15-minute article than watch a 2.5-hour YouTube video on the same topic. So personally, I'm a fan of written articles. And I have a lot of ideas that I would like to put down, but right now I'm just kind of focusing with the time I have on the video aspect of things. So if you want to see what I've written on my Substack, there isn't much there at this time, but you can go check that out. So I just want to point that out. And then I have let's try to zoom out a little bit. This is a little bit too much. I have my live, so I have the tabs up here, the videos, live, playlist. Let's just take a look at what we got. I only have 2 videos right now, so videos are uploaded videos. They're not live streamed. There's only 2 right now. I have one of Dr. James White in a debate, basically stating that Paul has alters Christian theology. And then I have one of our friend Matt Slick, so not much there either. The live is where I've done most of my activity. I've got a good number so I think I have 54 live videos, and a lot of them are open discussions, so you're free to watch those, but some of them are more informative of nature. I try to do a mix of discussions, and then and then also a number of them where I'm just kind of by myself, kind of discussing things that are important to me. So I have a couple, and I've been starting the ID update series. So we've done 3 of those. I think those are some of the best videos I've done. They're not the most popular videos I've done, but at the same time, for me personally, I really enjoy them. I think they're extremely informative, especially the last one, the 3rd ID update. I think was just a home run in demonstrating a serious scientific challenge to evolutionary theory and why intelligent design makes more sense, which is developmental gene regulatory network. So if you didn't see the last ID update and you're interested in the intelligent design versus evolution kind of discussion, I highly recommend watching that. Let's just kind of review some of the things I've done. I have the playlists, and so I have a number of playlists. So I have the educational presentations. I have my catalog of conversations with Matt Slick. For those of you who are more interested in Christian theology and the debate between like what I call like Reformed/modern/Protestant theology plus other ideas, my conversation with Matt slick or informative. A number of the videos I've actually reviewed on my live, so the reviews are on there. I think those are good as well. I have the open rooms playlist. I used to on this channel play chess a little bit, so if any of you wants to see me playing chess, you can go do that. I don't know, maybe you have nothing better to do with your life, but whatever the case may be, if you want to see me playing chess, there's a chess playlist. But the educational presentations are right here, so we can take a look at these. I think these are among the more important things I've done with this channel so far. The last one was the Dennis McDonald mimesis video. I have videos about studying Christian theology, the Epistle of Polycarp, studying that one. I think that was a really good one. Jesus taught work salvation, scientific evidence against evolution. I need to get a playlist with the ID updates. I'm going to start another playlist pretty soon here. A lot of educational videos about Christian theology and doctrine. I have my anti-Trinitarian presentations. I have over 100 verses in the New Testament that basically refute the Trinity or show it to be basically something that wasn't really believed when the New Testament documents were being written. Did Jesus ever claim to be Yahweh God? I did an analysis of that. Papias, I did a review of Papias and what is known of his writings. It's extremely important stuff. The Rich Young Ruler, the top 10 most shocking and outrageous things said by Paul of Tarsus. Christianity according to Justin Martyr was a great one. Repentance and salvation. So defining what is true biblical repentance or true Christian repentance and what is its relationship to salvation. I essentially prove that repentance means stopping sinning. It does not just mean to believe the gospel. You actually do have to stop sinning to have repented. And I also prove that it's necessary for salvation. So I think that was incredibly important. And the first video I ever did was salvation according to Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels, which is obviously, I started with that because I wanted everyone to know why I believe what I believe about salvation and Christianity. I think when you look at the words of Jesus, it's very obvious that we're not saved by faith alone. We actually do have to obey the commandments of God. We have to persevere, and we have to do that until the day we die. And if we fall away before we die, then we lose whatever merit we had. Jesus clearly taught that. It's just right there. So there's no way to deny it. But what people will do when you point them, well, Ephesians 2:8, 9, and 11 says that we're saved not by works, but through grace alone, and not by works, lest any man should boast, or whatever it says. And I'm like, okay, Ephesians can say what it wants, but I'm telling you what Jesus said, so you're going to have to figure out how to make all that work in yourself. So good luck with that. Okay, so that's just a review of my channel. I just wanted to do that really quickly, just so people are aware of all that. There's a lot there for people who are interested in these topics. Let's do this. Go to the So these are the kind of the things I think would be interesting to discuss tonight. We don't have to discuss these things. We can, it's going to be up to whoever joins, assuming anyone does join. But these are kind of just things to think about for people who get us rolling a little bit. So these are the propositions. Let's see if we can get this. God exists. So these are the kind of things that I believe. I'm not saying I have absolute certainty that I'm correct in these things, but these are kind of things that I think are interesting points of discussion that I currently believe. And that if people disagree with me, they're free to come present their perspective as well. But here's where I am. So these are the things I think that are important that people need to understand to have a worldview that reflects reality in a way that will be most beneficial to their long-term well-being. And when I say long-term, I really mean eternal well-being. So God exists, and what is God? God is a conscious creator and the source of creation. So that's kind of how I define God. It's two things. God is the source of creation, and God is conscious. God is aware. God is intelligent. God thinks. God has intentions. Those are the two main factors that I think go into what God is. And obviously there are others, but I think those are the two main. That's how I would define God. That's what a God is to me. The afterlife exists, or I guess you could also say like consciousness continues after death. in some way. So I think that's really important for people to understand, is that there's a big debate about, whether we continue to exist in some state of consciousness after we die. Modern science is trying to tell us that, everything's all our consciousness is a product of the brain and brain activity. I really think that's dubious at best. I think that the mind, the consciousness, can't be explained by chemical processes in the brain. A lot of it, some of it clearly can. There's clearly a correlation between what takes place in our conscious states. But to say that our mind and consciousness is entirely a product of brain activity or bodily physical activity, I think is quite a stretch, which necessarily leads to the idea that consciousness isn't entirely contingent upon our brain and physical being. All right, so heaven and hell exist. So basically, yes, when you're conscious, there are places there's reality beyond this world, and there's a heaven and there's a hell. Okay, so I believe those things. I believe we have souls, obviously. Okay, this is all kind of going hand in hand. If you believe you have afterlife, you're probably going to believe in a soul. So I believe humans have souls, which I would kind of just think of as basically being your current mind, since the mind really is not contingent upon the brain. So when you die, your mind continues, and mind and soul can almost be thought of as synonymous in my view. Again, if people want to disagree with that, even from a Christian perspective, you're free to do so, because I've actually been hearing Christians more recently, and maybe this has always been a view, but I've been hearing Christians saying that we actually don't have a soul in the more traditional way of thinking of it, but that human beings are a soul, and therefore, when we die, we just kind of go blank, much like the atheist perspective, except that there's a resurrection and God will put our bodies back together, and then we'll be a soul again and conscious again, which I think is pretty fascinating. I strongly disagree with it. I think it's not based on rational analysis or scripture. I think that there are Bible verses saying that we have a conscious soul that can exist independently of the body. But nevertheless, I've been hearing people say this recently. So there will be a judgment of our soul. So God, who created the universe, is going to judge us based on whatever standard God has set, which I believe Jesus Christ provided to us for understanding. I believe it was revealed to Jesus for our understanding. And obedience to God is necessary for a favorable judgment. Now, you might think most Christians would agree with this, but no. Modern Christianity does not teach this. Modern Christianity teaches that obedience is not necessary to God, which is why it's a dangerous idea. Christianity, as it's currently taught, is a very dangerous system. It's destructive to society. It's destructive to human beings. And it's dangerous. It's very dangerous for what's being taught in the modern churches. Now, there are some denominations and branches of Christianity which teach obedience to God is necessary. Like, believe it or not, Catholicism teaches that obedience to God's commands are necessary. Orthodox teaches, and even some Protestant denominations teach this. But they're contradicting themselves in some of their other theology and creating problems for themselves. But the thing about the Catholics and the Orthodox, and I've said this before, is they have embedded this truth in a man-made system which confuses everything and creates problems, and is therefore the system itself, when it comes to Catholicism, is an obstruction to truth. The institution, the system, all of it is ultimately distracting from just the simple truth that you have a personal relationship with God. You don't need an institution to be a middleman between you and God. No, it's between you and God. It's your relationship with God. It's your soul. You're in control of it, and how you will be judged is basically dependent on your decisions and your behavior in your life. Okay. And the Catholic Church can guide you. I think that was the original purpose of the church, was to guide people, not to be this absolute necessity of you can't attain salvation without the church. I think the church was merely there to be a place where people can go and learn, and not necessarily a place where you needed to go to think that you had access to God. So I think that fact that the Orthodox and the Catholics both teach that idea is problematic. They both teach you have to be a member of their church to be saved and in a right relationship with God, which I don't think was the original intent. I think Jesus established the church, and I think the church Jesus established probably looked very similar to the Orthodox Church, but and how it's run. But obviously, it evolved over time, and things were added, and the distortions were made through the councils, and just this is what happens over time. Things get corrupted. So I think that if I think the original church, I think it probably most closely resembled Orthodox Christianity, or even Orthodox Christianity, even though it's the closest to what I think original Christianity was, is still very far off the mark. And a lot of changes would need to be made. And I'm going to post a link in a couple of minutes here, but I'm just going to say I've been thinking a lot about whether the changes that I think needed to be made to Christianity can actually be made without destroying the entire edifice. Namely, can the changes I think need to be made without destroying Christianity entirely? Because if you start talking about the fact that the canon is inaccurate, well, then you start getting into the problem of people saying, well, this is what the church has been doing all along. So, quote, Christianity has been wrong all along, and therefore, why should we trust anything about it? Why, if God couldn't get his church right from the beginning, then, what is there really to hold on to believe? And that is a legitimate criticism of my methods, but I think that ultimately the truth must be promoted and prevail. And I really think that the shift in perspective needs to be this: we have to go back to the origin. We have to go back to what was the original essence of Christianity. And the original essence of Christianity was not the Bible. I hate to say that, but it's just true. The original essence of Christianity, the original foundation, was the teachings of Christ and the original Testament prophets. See, Christ based his ministry upon what the prophets before him said, and that's why there's consistency between Jesus Christ and the prophets. Assuming that Jesus, you believe in Jesus and he existed and all that, and that he was really a prophet and these things actually are real. An atheist is going to say it's all nonsense. But if you believe in God and the idea of prophecy, then this is where I'm at. So I'm just going to say, I think this is achievable. I think this is a message that can resonate for people who are willing to accept it. The problem is, and when I say the message is this, that we need to return to Jesus' words only, essentially. There are so many branches of Christianity, denominations, and individual churches that are built upon the current structure, and they have emotional attachments and ties to it. There's obviously going to be a massive amount of resistance to this. So it's kind of a messy picture, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, souls are literally being lost every single day in these churches. So it's better to try to go after it and preach the truth and spread it and get people. Because if people are going to lose their souls in the churches today anyways, then what does it all matter? If they're going to be led in there and taught that they're saved by faith alone and saved by grace and things like that, then they're losing their souls anyways. So if they lose their souls as an atheist, or if they lose their soul as a quote-unquote Christian who believes that, you don't have to obey God, it's all the same to me. So there's no use in defending any of it. We have to get back to the truth, is how I look at it. So again, okay, I'm going to post a link in about a couple seconds. And again, we don't have to talk about the things I just talked about. We don't have to talk about any of this necessarily, but those are just things I'm throwing out there for people to kind of get people thinking, and basically just what I wanted to say before anyone else joins. So I'm going to post a link and pin it. And if anyone wants to join, then they are free to do so. Otherwise, I will just kind of continue talking about things that are important to me. Maybe I'll try to solve the YouTube issues on my channel, the audio issues on my channel. But yeah, the link should be pinned.
How's it going?
Oh, we have Eastern Thomas. I believe that's Pseudo Silas, right?
That is correct.
All right, Pseudo Silas, how are you doing? Okay, and we have another lovely contestant. We have Andy. So,
Hello.
good to see you, Andy. So Pseudo Silas or Eastern Thomist joined first, and then Andy. So let's do it this way. How about Pseudo Silas, or excuse me, I'm going to use you're going by Eastern Thomist. So how about you take a couple minutes to just introduce yourself and any thoughts you might have, and then Andy, we'll go to you, and we'll kind of just try to get into a flow from there, depending on what you both say. So how about that? So Pseudo Silas, why don't you go and introduce yourself and just kind of give your thoughts on whatever you have it is in mind, and then we'll move to Andy after that.
Yeah, sure. I'm Eastern Thomist. Essentially, I'm an Eastern Catholic. So in the Catholic Church, there are rites that are still in communion with Rome, but they more so follow some of the Eastern traditions. I tend to align with them, but I'm still in full communion with Pope Leo the 14th. So I am still fully Roman Catholic. It's just I go to an Eastern Rite church. Um, in regards to what A's was saying about obedience to Christ, I would mostly agree. I think I would. I don't know if I would word it in that sense. But one thing I also want to add to that is a lot of people I think who are both pro and anti St. Paul, and I know A's view on St. Paul. I think a lot of them tend to misinterpret what St. Paul says on justification. And I think that that is kind of where the root sort of divide between Christians on justification comes from. St. Thomas basically talks about how justification is an inner act of God literally, changing the person, literally justifying the person, changing the person by reckoning original justice unto them through justification. So, in the same way, when you read God say, let there be light, and there's an efficient cause because of that, in the same way, when God justifies a person, that person is internally justified. And because the our works, the end of our works, is the perfect good, which is ultimately of God. Because of that, a person's good works don't mean anything until they are infused with grace, because then their works are directed towards the ultimate end, which is God and the beatific vision. But a lot of people misinterpret those verses, and they kind of tend to think, oh well, when he talks about faith not works, he's saying that righteousness is imputed unto you. Rather, what it seems he's actually saying is that a person is infused with righteousness, and then their works are targeted towards their original end. But before that, a person's works are irrelevant because they're not targeted towards a specific end until they believe in Christ, and then they're infused with grace. And I think you can see that a little bit in St. Paul's works, especially when you read Romans chapter 6. In Romans chapter 6, he kind of talks about how, he's criticizing Jews for believing the law can justify them. He says, what are we to continue going on sinning, hoping that grace abounds? By no means, kind of indicating that any sort of justification that allowed a person to continue sinning, like the old covenant laws, were insufficient. But that was just something I wanted to say to kind of build upon what A was saying about obedience. And I just wanted to introduce myself, so I just thought I'd give my 2 cents there.
All right. Well, that would certainly be a conversation I would like to have, and I want to hear what Andy was thinking as well. If you want to introduce yourself, Andy, however you would like, and also anything that you want to discuss, it doesn't have to be what Eastern Thomas was talking about, but I think depending on what you say, we will have to make a decision which way we want to go, or at least figure out how we're going to do it from a timing standpoint. But yeah, why don't you just give some thoughts, Andy, and we'll see where things go from there.
Okay. I'm Andy. I'm I think I've talked to you both before, but I'm an atheist, um, former Christian of more than 2 decades. Um, Trying to think of what I wanted to say. I've been looking for my faith lately, the past, well, maybe a year or two, because my grandmother died. Uh, and before she died, just me and her had a talk. She was really concerned about me sort of finding my way back to God. So I've began trying to keep an open mind to the Bible, and, you know, the idea of a God or whatever. And I remain unconvinced to this day still that the Bible is true. I think that the Old Testament is basically a mythologized but also historical retelling of the Jews or the proto Israelites gaining their freedom from the Egyptian rule and taking over Jerusalem. Not just Jerusalem, but just a mythologized version of their prospering. I think that Yahweh is a fictional character in the story uh, for a lot of different reasons, I guess we can get into. But by extension, I think that the New Testament is also assuming that we're saying the God of Jesus is Yahweh, which is pretty clear. I think by extension, the New Testament is also a fictional story, uh, and Jesus most likely was a real person. Or I'm on the fence about that anyway, but I don't think that any of the divinity claims about Jesus are historically accurate. I think that that's part of the mythology, and that he was most likely just a not just, but it's quite significant. But he was a rebellious Jew. I think that just was interested in the sort of mystical apocalyptic Judaism that was popular at the time, and he maybe thought he was the Messiah, and maybe his followers actually also thought he was the Messiah. And I also don't think that the Gospel of John should be part of the biblical canon. Maybe not Matthew, maybe not Luke. I'm not really sure. It's something I need to study up on more, but I'm thoroughly convinced that John is an apocryphal text. If any of it is canonical, I think that John would be the most likely candidate for an apocryphal text in the canon. And that's all.
All right. Wow. So you both presented two very very different perspectives, and I would really like to engage both of them, but I don't think I'm going to be able to uh, do that because they're obviously two completely different directions. I don't
We
know.
can go in any direction you want. I really don't care which direction
Yeah,
we go in.
I would love to go, if possible, and like I would love to engage the points you made and the points that Andy made, but it's two completely different conversations, so I don't know how that's going to happen.
You can just engage with Thomas's points first. I'll
If
be
you want to
patient.
do Andy's points, that's fine. I mean, I'm willing to go in any direction. I know there were a lot of things you discussed before we
Yeah,
joined.
how about this? How about we kind of touch on some of the stuff Andy said, and then we kind of get into the more like internal Christian dialogue with you, Eastern Thomas. How about that?
Sure, that works.
Okay. So, I guess some things I say is a fictional character, eh, Andy?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try and give you a logical an idea, a framework that is internally logically consistent. All right. Let's just say I'm not saying that God does exist. Let's say God did exist. Okay. It would make sense that would it make sense that if God exists and He created mankind along with all the earth and all of it, but he created mankind, that he would want to communicate with us, right?
Um, Maybe. I mean, maybe there are things out there in the universe that are so amazing that we seem insignificant in comparison, but we only know our little bubble, so that we think we're the most amazing thing in the universe, but really, like for example, and I'm not going to rant, but just for example, like life, according to, and I know you have your disagreements with evolution, but like according to evolution, life has been evolving on the planet for anywhere from 500 million to a billion years, and pretty much for no reason. It seems like primates that had capabilities that a lot of animals had before them, uh, because of environmental changes or what have it, rapidly increased in intelligence and became what we are today. And I don't see any reason that couldn't have happened in another planet, 400 million years ago or something, to some primate-like species that just met the exact right conditions, and surpassed what we're at now for intelligence 500 million years ago. And and the universe could be full of life like that. And so it makes me wonder, at least, if there was a God, if he would even see the life on our planet as significant at all, or maybe not even be aware of life, like maybe just created the universe and created the laws of physics, and then as a result of the laws of physics, life formed naturally, and God is unaware of our existence.
Wow. One thing I'll say, Andy, is it sounds to me like you have a very choppy connection, and it's kind of difficult to listen to. I don't know if you're aware of that, but you're coming in very choppy, a lot of static feedback. I don't know if there's any way, maybe if you sometimes if you kind of exit the studio and refresh and rejoin, sometimes it kind of solves those issues. I don't know if you've had those kinds of issues before. Let's give Andy a second to see if we can get a better connection with him, because it's kind of, I would like to speak with him, but it's difficult to hear what he's saying. Good to see you, Freddie. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Freddie, how are you?
Let's see if we can get Andy to get back with some
Yeah.
some better audio. All right, Andy, let's hear it. Let's hear if it's any better.
Is this any better?
It sounded to me like there might be say hello. My name is Andy, and I want to talk about things in the stream. Just say that.
Hello, my name is Andy, and I want to talk about things in the stream.
It's a little bit better. It's still a little bit, but it's better than it was before. So we'll go with it. Okay. So, all right. So yeah. So for God to want to communicate with humans, I don't think it's necessary that we're the only life in the universe. Personally, I believe very strongly in the possibility of extraterrestrial life, and I think that God communicates with all beings in some way. I'm not saying I necessarily believe in extraterrestrial life, but I don't see why extraterrestrial life can't exist. And I'm talking beings that are smarter than humans, more intelligent, more technologically advanced. I think it's a real possibility. But that is irrelevant to, I think that God being, in my opinion, aware of everything, of all existence, and an omniscient being. God wants to communicate with every one of his creatures. So what I was trying to get to, and again, I know that there's a lot to be established there from an evidentiary standpoint, and we're assuming a lot there. I guess what I was trying to get to is the idea that God would communicate to God if God existed, a transcendent, a being that created the universe. I think that one mechanism that God could use and probably would use is human prophets. Okay, so we are being given revelations by this being, God, who is beyond our comprehension, beyond our ability to perceive, through vessels that we can understand, through vessels that are relatable to us. So a question might arise: why wouldn't God just write a big message in the sky that says, "Hey, it's me, it's God. I'm really here. I really exist. Believe in me," or something like that? That's a valid question, and I haven't answered that. I guess all I'm trying to say is, I think that when it comes to Yahweh specifically, these are the communications of God through a specific people, namely the Jews. Now, I think that God also communicated with other civilizations on Earth throughout Earth's history. But when we look at the Bible and the original Testament, as I call it, I think the original Testament is perhaps partially mythologized, but also at the same time containing truth value. I think it's a record of the communications of the creator of the universe with this group of people. And what I want you to respond to is this is the point I want to engage. Is that could it theoretically be logical that what I just said, essentially, that God exists and that God has chosen this means, prophecy, prophets, to reveal messages to mankind, and that's why should we assume that this is mythological in your mind?
Well, I don't necessarily see it as illogical that God would choose that way, but I do think that there's probably a more convincing and more productive way to do it. Like, for example, I think that humans are extremely skeptical of each other. You know, we know that humans lie, and everybody has known that since the dawn of time. So to give your message through a human that somebody has the ability to say, oh, I think this person's lying, like people lie all the time, that seems foolish. Like you could just materialize in some sort of, you know, whatever. I mean, anything you wanted. I saw make an animal talk or do something that seems magical that doesn't exist in nature to, prove that you're a god or something. But just to like, I don't know, to speak in like through
Let
a
me run
human,
this
like,
by you.
oh, God told me. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me run this by you. Why? So this goes to the point I made earlier. Why doesn't God take the clouds, turn them into strobe lights, giant strobe lights, and write a message saying, "Hey, everyone, God, this is God writing this message. Believe in me," or something like that. Something really that everyone can look at and be like, "Hey, this is evidence of God." So why doesn't God? You're basically asking why doesn't God do something like that instead of like going through these humans who could just be making up some story about how they're talking to a God creature being thing, right? So that's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, and that's my question. I would
All
ask
right.
the exact same thing because, like, for instance, like if God was to do something like that, like, you know, take the moon and break it up into little pieces and make it spell out God right in front of my eyes, or Yahweh or something, or Andy, this is God talking to you, or something like that. Like, I would be a believer tomorrow and for the rest of my life. Like, there's no, you know what I mean? But that just doesn't happen.
All right, here let me try to answer it. And this is my answer. I'm not even saying this is necessarily consistent with Christian theology. I think I can provide an answer that makes sense from a rational perspective. And here's where I come at. So I think it first comes down to the in my opinion, the idea that people want to say that God can do anything. And I actually disagree with that. I think that God is bound by God's essential nature. And in my opinion, the laws of physics are a manifestation of the essence of God, which is why they're, in my opinion, immutable, constant. They act everywhere at all times the same way through all time. So the laws of physics are controlling things like the inanimate, particles in the universe. They are controlling the clouds, the movement of the clouds, and the sun and the stars. Now, what there? So there's that aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that there's a dichotomy between the inanimate particles in the universe and the will or the act of the mind. So there's a dichotomy between mind and matter. Okay, so basically, the reason God would communicate through prophets is because God actually can't do a miracle in the sense that you're talking about. He can't violate the laws of physics. But mind basically does even human will and free will essentially violates physics by doing things that wouldn't otherwise happen unless we decide it. So mind actually takes precedent over matter. So God can't basically do a true miracle in the sense that you're talking about, where he just takes some clouds, violates the laws of physics, and writes a giant message in the sky. But what God can do is communicate directly to the mind of a sentient being and influence that person's mind to say things. So God won't, or it may, or could potentially, to a person who's open to it, maybe make them see things, okay, that appear to be miracles. But it would all happen within the person's consciousness, not within external reality. So I think that this is why God doesn't do things like that, because God actually can't do things like that. But God can speak to us through mental communication, which is why God prefers. Now, you know, this gets into a lot of topic about miracles in the Bible and how would they happen then, but this is kind of where I come at it from. Like, so I don't know how does that strike you? Did anything I say like seem at least plausible within its own logical framework? I don't know.
That's probably the most realistic and plausible proposition I've heard for like an explanation for the you know what seems to be God's shortcoming would be that he's literally not all powerful, because that would solve a lot of issues with my disbelief in the Old Testament. Not all of them, but I mean that does seem to be an issue that God. It comes down to a point of me coming to the conclusion typically that God is either unable to change something or just too evil to care to change it.
Thomas, did you have a thought about it,
Yeah,
perhaps?
yeah, I do. So it's interesting he talks about this because St. Thomas borrows from Aristotle on this very point. And he talks about causes. And, he talks about secondary causes, instrumental causes, which is God essentially using material beings or material sources within his creation to try and communicate something. This is actually one of the debates that Protestants and Catholics have, because when you look at something like the sacrament of confession, for example, a Protestant will say, well, I don't need that. I can just look up to the sky and confess my sins to God. Whereas a Catholic would say, well, God uses instrumental causes. Those are secondary causes that are within his framework of creation. Now, St. Thomas says the motive that God has for using this is essentially to give his creation order. He doesn't want to just set up rules for creation and then just break those rules. Now he would now when it comes to miracles, St. Thomas would say miracles are going beyond what is expected of creation. But when it comes to just creation in general, he doesn't want to obstruct the laws that he sets for his own creation. But another thing that St. Thomas said, and this kind of harks back, maybe it's a little bit different, but it kind of lines up with what A was saying, was St. Thomas basically says it is not within God's perfect power to cause a contradictory situation. So you might say, oh, well, God, can God make a triangle without three sides? Well, a triangle without three sides would be a contradiction. And so you might say, well, that means God's not all powerful. But St. Thomas would respond to that and he would argue, no, because that's a deficient situation. And if God is all good, he can't cause a deficient situation. And he kind of talks about there's this classical sort of atheist philosophical question about God, which is if God can God create a rock that is too heavy for him to lift? A lot of times atheists will ask that question, and St. Thomas addresses this, and he says, because God's power is all perfect and all good, and it's sufficient, God can't cause a contradictory scenario, because then his power wouldn't be sufficient, and therefore he couldn't create a rock that was too heavy for him to lift, because that would be a contradictory situation.
Yeah, I want to build on that, and I think this is a really interesting conversation because it gets into the idea of the omnipotence of God versus what are the limitations of God. And I think when Christians hear someone say that God is limited, it immediately strikes them as kind of blasphemous, or at least an attack on the impugning the nature and character of God. But we do need to realize that yes, God has limitations. Even a quote all powerful God has limitations. And let me give you an example. I recently saw a community post on a YouTube channel of a somewhat prominent Reformed theologian who said that God could make a square circle. That it's not something we could understand. It's not something we can conceive of, but God is so powerful that God could make a square circle. And another example I would give, not that he gave it, but essentially that God could make 2 plus 2 equal 5. And I want to say that actually I disagree. I do not think, I think that these things are outside the bounds of even what God can do. And I think it's necessary that we understand that this is because God is restricted to being within the nature of God, and within the nature of God, there can be no untruth or falsehood, which means that things must be a certain way and not different than what the way they are. If it's to be basically make a consistent and logical reality. So I guess where I'm going with this is that yeah, like there what are things that God can't do? God can't stop being God. God must necessarily possess the quality of immutability. So if God could stop being God, then God isn't trustworthy. It's not a God worth calling God. God must always exist. God must be eternal. So these are things that for when people say that there's God can do anything, I think that's a rational philosophical and theological error for people to say that. So I think this is kind of how I would go about answering this question of why doesn't God write a giant message in the sky using the clouds? I think the answer lies in the fact that the laws of physics themselves are constraints imposed upon reality and are manifestations of the nature of God. And therefore, God is subject to obeying his own rules, his own essence, essentially. So God must operate within the reality that is established by the essence of God. So to say that God could just violate the laws of physics and do these things is to say that God can violate his own nature. So God's not going to do it that way because God can't do it that way. So that's kind of so this kind of leads to why does God work through these imperfect human vessels who are capable of lying, capable of getting things wrong? I think it comes down to the fact that God needs to operate through a sentient being who can communicate things be outside. Okay, so Dub is making an interesting point. I've talked a long time, but I just want to answer Dub here. Jesus walked on water. Okay, yes. Let's just first of all assume that this actually happened, which I believe it could have happened, but let's obviously a skeptic is not going to agree that Jesus walked on water, but for me, I believe it could have happened. So if it did happen, how would it have happened according to my scheme? I believe. So again, this is just my personal take. I'm not saying this is necessarily something that Christians have to accept or believe. I think that it's possible that because Jesus had direct communication with God as the prophets do, God could have communicated to Jesus a way of manipulating the laws of physics in such a way that he can walk on water, which is obviously something so basically, what appears to be a miracle to us is actually just Jesus understanding the laws of physics to a much greater understanding, which allows him to do things that appear miraculous, but are actually within the constraints of physical reality for everyone else. So, in other words, if we understood what Jesus knew, we would be able to walk on water too. But God hasn't revealed that to us, so we don't know how to do it. That's basically my answer. I'm not sure it satisfies everybody, but it's consistent within my theme. Yeah. Yikes! If Jesus created the world at all, things that were created, I think he can do pi, who is of. I think he can do pi, who is of physics, and walk on water. What are you trying to say? So, okay, well, when the I don't believe Jesus created the world. First of all, I believe God did that, and also when it says God created the world in Genesis, if you read the next sentence, it says it was formless, and then God gave it form. So it was the matter of the universe always existed, but God applied God's mind to it and gave it form, and basically formed the celestial bodies that way. Is kind of how I look at it. Well, okay. So Andy, go ahead. Respond to what I just said, if you want to.
Yeah. Well, the way I see it, I think that if we're taking any of the Bible as true, it seems that God regularly does things like that exceed the difficulties. Like, for example, God leads, the Israelites into cities to conquer the entire city and take over, whatever, you name it. Large groups of people that are viewed as evil in the Bible are, God leads the Israelites toward, destroying them and making things right. So if that happened, if we're taking that as truth, then it's like, why isn't God forming a coalition of people to take care of, child traffickers that are keeping children in prison in cages and beating them and sexually abusing them? It's like, why is God allowing that to happen? But he didn't, like, he sees it so wrong that people are worshiping Baal or Anat or, El. But it's like nowadays we have crimes that are, in my eyes, 1,000 times worse, if not equally worse. And nothing is being done about it. It's, with centuries. I mean, all throughout history, we know psychologically that, with a girl as young as, just hitting puberty is extremely psychologically damaging. And yet all through history, God has allowed that to happen to young underage girls. And like I said, even now, children are subject to child trafficking. And in my eyes, children are not old enough to know wrong from right and are completely innocent. And there's just no excuse for that. So I see it as either God is unable to change the child trafficking situation, or he doesn't care. And if he can't change it, or he doesn't care, then why should I worship him?
Thomas, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, if I could just I was hoping to kind of respond and maybe just build a little bit off of that. So I would disagree with a little bit just on his point. I would agree, yes, God cannot make 2 + 2 = 5. He can't he can't, he can't cause contradictory situations, because that would imply that his power is not sufficient. Now, I disagree that he can't advance the laws of nature in his creation. That's something I would disagree with. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the concept that that him walking on water is essentially just something that we've failed to be able to do. What I will say though is, and this is something, and I think it goes to Andy's question as well. There was a philosopher named Blessed John Scotus, and he talks about this, and it's the principle of fittingness. And so the principle of fittingness basically asserts that God chooses to do specific things or cause specific things based on the best outcome, what he views as the best possible outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is relegated to that outcome, but it does mean that he believes, or that God sees that as the most fitting outcome in his providence and in his plan. And that's the plan that he enacts. Now, in regards to Andy's question, he asks a very good question about the problem of evil. How can God exist if the problem of evil is around? And, why can't God just show himself? And I think what somebody like St. Thomas would say is, yes, God could just come out and show himself if he wanted to, but that would not be the most fitting outcome for two reasons. Number one is it would deprive a person of faith. St. Thomas basically argues that faith is the highest science that exists. A lot of people think of faith as contradictory to science. St. Thomas says that faith is a science, and he says it's one of the most noble sciences because true faith is based on antecedents. So it's not just, hey, A, I'm secretly Batman and A believes me. It's, okay, here's a claim, and here's an antecedent to that claim, and that allows the mind to assent to a specific conclusion based on the antecedents that exist. And St. Thomas says, because those antecedents exist, the mind is essentially conforming based on natural reason to a higher truth, and that makes faith one of the more noble sciences. But he also says it is most fitting that a person be given a level of free will. And the reason St. Thomas argues this is because God is perfect intellect and God can't stand injustice. The most just outcome is that a person have the ability to either choose to participate or not participate in the eternal good, which is God, and that there might be rewards or punishments based on that, and that might satisfy his perfect justice. If he was to just, as you would say, write his name in the sky, then a person really wouldn't have a choice. A person would have to believe in God because if they didn't believe in God at that point, they would be an insane person in a loony bin. And God specifically doesn't do that so that a person might be able to assent to the truth of God by the natural faculties, by the scientific faculties of faith, which is one of the most noble sciences, and also B, that the person that the person might be given a level of free will, not total free will, but a level of free will, so that justice, rewards, and punishments might be given out as a form of God's perfect justice.
Yeah, before Jill and Andy will obviously be given an opportunity to respond, and also Jill has joined. But I just wanted to say, yeah, okay. So thank you for all of that, Thomas. I guess when it comes to me and what Andy said about God not just even within my framework, just basically like communicating to everyone, hey, there's a huge problem here. Let's all get together and stop it. Whatever, because there's a lot of criminality going on in this world of all different kinds. Some is obviously worse than others, but there's wars. There's people being violated in various ways. There's thievery, every manner of suffering in this world being caused by evil and things like that. So okay, yeah. So what is God doing? Is God just like sitting back there, just like laughing at us as we get things wrong and suffer? I think the answer that first of all, I want to disagree with Thomas. First of all, I think God doesn't really he doesn't want us to rely on faith. I think that God wants us to have faith because it's necessary, but I think God does absolutely everything that God can within God's nature to get us to see the truth. but that there are limitations to what God can do in this regard. And all right, so quickly to respond to Andy's points. First of all, I think God does speak to some people. There are people who've claimed, like, when there's a problem, that they have had some premonition that they need to do something, or they found their life calling by like hearing an audible voice saying to them, "Hey, you need to be part of this organization that's stops child trafficking and things like that." So those things do happen. The question would become, why doesn't God do it for everyone? And the answer, I think, would probably lie in the fact that maybe, and again, maybe there are, not everyone is open to maybe there's some part of our own ego or selves that suppresses our ability to communicate with God in this way and receive these direct tangible, direct sense of what God is trying to tell us to do. That's kind of what I would say would theoretically make sense. I can't say it's absolutely true that that's the case, but that's kind of where I would go. But Andy, you can respond, but after Jill, gives his words. So maybe Jill, what did you have to say about it? It looks like you might be muted, by the way. I'm not sure if you're muted or what's going on. Jill, are you there? Earth to Jill, can't hear what you're saying. Oh, yeah, there you go. Now I hear you.
How's it going?
Good. So did you have a specific point, or did you want to respond to something that was said, or what's going on?
No, I was just I just tuned in, so I'm not sure where the conversation's going, but
Yeah, okay. Just maybe just listen along, and if you have a point, then put it forward. But that's kind of like, I'm just trying to think of a logical framework that would work within like the questions that Andy's answering about why. It's a good question. So there's a lot of evil stuff going on in the world. We can think of maybe a lot of ways that God could solve these problems. God being all knowing and God communicating to us what we need to do. I think the answer lies in the fact that maybe part of it is our own unrighteousness. We don't want to hear what God's saying, so we block him out. Something like that. Maybe it's all within us all. If we worked hard enough, we would be able to directly communicate with God in that way. But our ego blocks us from doing so. I don't know if that kind of would make sense, at least make sense to you, or if there's another problem you see.
you said that our ego, you call it.
Our ego, our inclination to disobey God, our inclination to resist the will of God, things like that.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
that was mainly directed towards Andy, though. I didn't know if Andy thought that would kind of solve the problem, at least. Not that it's necessarily true, but that it would solve the problem he put forward. What do you think, Andy? You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree, but I'm still left in the same position that I just don't see how God could allow children to suffer in that way on a scale that's happening, and not just stop it immediately. But to me, either he doesn't care enough to stop it immediately and is going to let it go on for decades or centuries or millennia or whatever's been happening, I don't really know, or he's unable to. And if he's unable to, then we have huge contradictions with the Bible.
I think, this probably isn't the first time you've heard this point being made, Andy, but I think the reason God, quote, doesn't do anything. So within the Christian framework, I think there's a solution to this. First of all, is that God has given us free will. So I know there are branches of Christianity that don't believe that. That's what I believe. So I'm going to go with it. I think that solves the problem. Second of all, so that is part of how creation operates. Humans have the ability to choose to do good or evil. Okay, so some people do evil, unfortunately. The second thing I want to say before you respond is that we will be judged, and we're being told by the prophets that there's a judgment coming. You live on this earth, you walk around, you do what you want, you do the evil things, you think you're getting away with it. Maybe you do on this earth, maybe you don't. But at the end of the day, God's going to judge every single person on earth, and whatever you did, there's going to be perfect justice. So I think, yeah, all the child traffickers, all the people abusing children, all the people doing all the evil in the world, some of them might be getting away with it, some of them might not. As far as human justice, nobody is going to get away with it in the end. There's going to be justice, according to what I believe.
Well, I'm not even really concerned with the justice. I'm just concerned with the children suffering at all. Like, I don't think that should ever happen to begin with. God should step in immediately. And I understand you say that we have free will, but like the Canaanites had free will. I mean, that's like saying the Canaanites should have had free will to, commit sexual immorality and, idolatry, but God had the Israelites move in and slaughter them for that. So it's like he's not doing that for the people that are trafficking children.
Okay, so your argument is that God should do it every time. He should stop evil whenever evil occurs. Whenever people choose to do evil, God should step in.
If it's on a scale like it is with child trafficking and the victims are as innocent, the most innocent people in the world, children, then yeah, he should step in. It's the absolute worst
So you
immorality I could
decide
imagine.
you decide based on your feelings when God should step in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that creates a problem because, first of all, we have to ask, why would God create a universe where suffering is possible at all? Not just evil things, but even things like, so this is a question that's being asked by atheists recently. Like, maybe we can understand why humans suffer, but some atheists are pointing out that why do animals get cancer? Why do animals get sick and die? Why are they don't sin? They can't sin. Sin is, you need to have a moral system, a conscience to be. And I think, first of all, the answer lies in the fact that I have not seen atheists prove that there's no value and benefit to suffering. Okay, from an eternal standpoint. Now, in a temporal standpoint, yes, it looks like suffering is unnecessary and useless. But I have yet to see atheists establish that suffering has no value in and of itself from a perspective that we can't understand. And secondly, if God is going to give us true free will, then it doesn't make sense that, God would basically just always step in when we don't do the right thing. And sometimes not doing the right thing is acting in a way that causes other people suffering. So it would violate, according to my system, basically the immutability of God, in that God has established a system. It's absolute, it's perfect. God, and we are created within that system. And unfortunate aspect of the system from our perspective, not from God's perspective, but from our perspective, is that if we truly have free will, which is to act however we want to choose in a moment, then we can make choices that cause suffering for other human beings. So the solution is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ said the solution is to love God and love your neighbor. So I think Christianity provides the solution to this.
If I
Yeah,
could also,
I agree.
Wait,
Go ahead,
all right,
Charlie.
so let's go with Thomas and then Andy. So Thomas, what did you have to say to that?
yes. So yeah, just to add upon that, and I think A touched on it a little bit, but another thing, we would also say in terms of the problem of evil is ultimately concupiscence. Concupiscence is ultimately the disordering of a person's natural desires as a consequence of the loss of original justice, which came from Adam. Now, some people might say, well, that's not fair because, Adam was the one who rebelled against God. You and I didn't rebel against God to begin with, or well, we have, but our disordering of desires comes from Adam, who first did that. So that doesn't really sound fair. But in reality, it is fair for two reasons. Number one, because Adam was the first human, therefore he was a representative for humanity. Therefore, his punishments also has to represent the punishments of all humanity, but also because ultimately we're saved by charity. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 2 says, "Without charity I am nothing." And so charity is ultimately the key. And so if salvation is not for one person, and salvation, can affect, an entire community, then so too can the loss of grace affect an entire community. And so Adam being, a member of the human race and being the first member of the human race, given that he was a part of that and he was the first, it is perfectly fitting, according to the order of justice, that his punishment, which was the lack of original justice, which led to the disordering of desires, which leads to evils that Andy is talking about, like rape and all these other horrible evils. It's fitting that punishment might affect the entire community, because man is not a singular island. Man is a part of a community. And therefore, it's fitting that the effects of his actions be manifest within the entirety of human race, because the human race is an entire charitable community. It's not just one person.
Before Andy responds, one thing I'll say is we have to be careful with the YouTube terms of service, because if we say certain words, then it automatically flags the video and it will get throttled. So let's just try to make sure we kind of carefully choose our language. I know no one's doing anything intentionally, but I sometimes I do this on other people's channels, and it's a careful thing. But also another thing is, like, we need to realize when we're putting too many points on the table to be responded to. So that's also again, I know everyone's sometimes I go overboard too, but let's just try to be aware of that. Andy, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I still would just go as far as what you said. I would still go back to just saying that I don't agree with the free will argument, because God interferes with free will in the Bible a bunch of times when things were too evil. So I mean, maybe God has different views on what's too evil, and idolatry is worse than what's happening on islands with children. But I disagree. I think that children are the most important, and if anything, if like I would, I would personally value uh, if the suffering of children meant that human life just not exist at all. Like if that was the only way to solve that children not suffer, is that all of human life just stopped existing, then I would just choose that. I wouldn't create a life system where like nothing is worth the suffering of children in my eyes, and especially on the level that it's happening.
Well, the only alternative would be
Nothing.
non-existence. So that's what my response to.
Well, no, I would disagree, because God could have just designed us without the tendencies to want to do that at all. He designed our brain.
He could have designed us to not sin.
No, just not to abuse children. Like sin is, everything is still the same. Just children, no desire to harm children at all.
Just not that particular sin. Gotcha.
Correct, because they're most helpless and the most innocent, and I don't think that they deserve any suffering.
Well, you do know that there are contingencies and factors leading up to that particular sin. There is also ranges of abuse. So are you talking emotional or physical or sexual or only sexual or only you're getting into now a a bit of a conundrum now, because now you have to determine, well, which sins do I want God to stop? And now you have another person with a list, a grocery list. So who is God to obey? Whose commands are God to obey as far as which sins should be eliminated?
Well, I'm not asking him to obey anyone. I'm saying that I think his choices are immoral. if he's allowing that kind of suffering to happen to children on any
Right.
level, if it's emotional or sexual or physical, on any level, and there's
My
no
question
excuse
is,
for that.
why should God take your emotional, immoral stance or your personal, subjective stance of what should be eliminated over someone else's?
Yeah,
Why
I
should
don't
he
think he
accept
should.
yours?
I don't think he should. I just disagree with his morality. So I'm saying if this God exists, he's either unable to change that or he is allowing it to happen. And if he's unable to change it, so be it. Maybe God's not all powerful.
Okay,
But
well,
if he's
that's not what all
allowing it to
powerful means. That's not what all powerful
but
means in
well,
scripture.
that's open to
But
interpretation.
well, no,
But
it's
my
not.
point is,
The
okay,
Bible defines what
so
it means by all powerful.
regardless, he's unable to change it. We can just not say all
No,
powerful
he's
then.
not.
He's either unable to change it, or he's allowing it to happen. And if he's allowing it to happen, then I
Okay.
just don't want to worship something like that. I don't
He's
nothing
allowing it to
nothing
happen,
else.
but try to answer to what I'm asking. Why
Okay.
should you're saying that it's God is wrong? So you are saying he should do something I say he should do. So don't respond by saying, well, I'm not saying he should do what I would do. You are saying that. You're saying by implication, you're saying that he is wrong. He's immoral. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you have to demonstrate why your position, your subjective position, morally should or should actually be in the equation at all. Because I can think of 1,000 times that are a lot more grievous things that I could put on the table that I think you would even agree with are worse than the rape of a child.
All right. He just asked you to watch the language.
Okay.
Say the abuse or violation are
Yeah.
suitable terms in my opinion.
I see a lot of.
Why should we or anyone take your list of moral oughts seriously over someone else's? Now, it was a movie I used to love to watch. It's a great family movie that you can actually watch and not have to worry about anything like nudity or anything popping up. But it was called Jim Carrey was in that movie, and Morgan Freeman played God. I think it was
Bruce Almighty.
Bruce Almighty, yeah.
And Bruce decided he was going to play God for a week or a day or however long. And he quickly realized when he got his email, when his email list came in, that he couldn't be God because he had to answer every single email from everyone that's sending God a prayer. So, to say that, your understanding of what is right or wrong, God should somehow placate to that. God would have to answer to everyone in order to be fair. He would have to answer to everyone. And now you have a world where nothing corresponds to reality. If I shoot you with a gun and that bullet doesn't follow according to the laws of physics, then science is impossible. Science now becomes an impossibility because I live in a world in which bullets turn into rubber because they're about to hit a small kid. And it goes against your moral nature or your moral ought for a child to die, an innocent child to die. Don't you see how that world that you're going to create, that you want God to create now, actually handicaps us? We can't even do science. We can't progress technologically. Because if Newton drops that apple and it doesn't fall because there's a baby, there's a small child that might get hit in the head and bruise its head and die. Now that God's going to stop the apple, and now he never comes up with theories of G-force theories, right?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, but I also think that you're assuming that the laws of physics couldn't work if God were to just stop the suffering of children. I don't see why they couldn't.
They would be inconsistent. They would lead to an inconsistency as far as those laws are concerned. He would have to perform a miracle. It actually wouldn't be a miracle.
He does. He performs miracles.
it wouldn't be a miracle if it happened every time. It would actually, bullets would actually, it would have, you would have to be worked that into the formula that the bullet would
He could
not
have
hit.
done that from the. He could have done that from the start.
Okay, so you want the formula for the projection of a bullet to change every time it's going to hit someone under the age of 18.
No, I think
Or you
that a
want the
more
bullet to
appropriate.
change into a different substance to whereby it
Nope.
doesn't harm the child. That would be a miracle, right?
Yeah, that would be a miracle, no doubt. But that's, I think, a more appropriate solution would just be to create a sort of brain chemistry to where we're not inclined to hurt children at all. Like we see it as the most detestable thing a human could do.
Well, I think there are a couple of assumptions there. First of all, the idea that our thoughts and decisions are a result of brain chemistry and not an independent mind or will, is one thing. But I think for once, I'm actually in agreement with Jill. Like, you actually already admitted that you would rather there be no existence than at all than there be an existence where suffering is possible. So
No,
certainly you.
that's not what I said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just the suffering of children, like, and not just the suffer. Like, I'm not talking about children getting beat up in a fist fight or something. Like, I'm talking about the human trafficking of children and the sort of,
Yeah.
you know, what that's happening to them. Like, that's way different.
Also,
Yeah,
abortion, right? You care about the unborn child or the unborn human, right? And its sufferings.
Yeah, it depends on how old the fetus is.
Okay, so it's really not about humanity.
Like, if it's
So
a zygote,
even
like,
within
I don't
your
care.
moral, well, this is exactly what I was saying. You're still inconsistent even within your own moral art that you're trying to force onto the God of the Bible. You can't even stay consistent within it. So why should
Why
anyone
is that inconsistent?
seriously?
Why is that
Because
inconsistent?
you just made an exception for the unborn. You said depending on how far it is in its
Yeah,
development.
like once
Right, so you
once
made
it
an
has
exception.
can I respond?
Yeah, well, yeah, you made an exception for one group, so you're not consistent within your own moral law.
Yeah, it's not an exception. You need to, there's more nuance to it. I think that like a zygote, for instance, I don't think that a zygote, which is just the pairing of two cells right as the egg is penetrated, I don't think that's conscious. I don't think that has pain receptors yet. In fact, we know it doesn't have pain receptors. It doesn't. So it doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have pain receptors. I don't see why I should care for it. But if it gets along a couple months and it can start experiencing pain or whatever, then I don't think abortions should be allowed at that point.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah,
Pain receptors. I got you. Okay.
Well, what I would say.
Go ahead, Thomas. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sure. So I guess just to kind of rehark on this again, what Andy is asking is probably one of the most debated questions that all Christian and atheist philosophers have had about Christianity or theism in general, which is the problem of evil. How do you solve that question? And I think the ultimate explanation it can ultimately be solved in 3 words: fittingness, fittingness, fittingness. What do I mean by that? God gives cause and God gives harmony to his creation and how that creation operates. Now, when it comes to punishments, or when it comes to his creation and how his creation operates, it's most fitting that there be punishments and rewards for that, for people in his creation. If there wasn't, then justice would be completely in vain, which is why a person ought to be able to rebel against the common good and then be punished for it. Now, in regards to child abusers, I guess I'll say, the reason why God doesn't come in and instantly stop those people is ultimately because if God were to always do that, then there wouldn't be punishments for his creation. And if there weren't punishments for his creation, then all justice would be in vain, and that would be against human dignity.
Yeah, I want to say I think I caught the end of what Thomas just said, and it might be what I'm about to say. But I actually think the broader framework presented by Christianity perfectly solves the problem of at least the problem of evil as it pertains to human activity, which is to say that, and I said this earlier, no matter how evil whatever it is we're doing is, nobody's going to get away with it according to Jesus Christ. God is going to. This earth is temporary. Everything in this earth is temporary. We're all going to die one way or another. And the only thing that matters is eternity. God has created a system where the good will be eternally enjoy the children who have suffered in this world unjustly, whoever it may be. They will be placed in eternity with God, and there will be no suffering there. The people who this is the purpose of this earth is for God's judgment to be just. God can look to us and say, "You're the one. I gave you free will, and look how you use it. Do you really deserve to live in harmony with everyone for all eternity?" And He's going to send them away. I think that the system presented by Christianity actually solves the problem of evil perfectly, which is that, and this is what is taught: there will be eternal justice.
Yeah, like I said, I've already answered this, but I don't give, I don't care at all about them receiving justice. I just don't want the children to suffer. And if it's a God that's allowing that to happen, I have no interest in worshiping that.
Well,
You
again,
do actually.
I don't think there's any reason to believe that Yahweh exists in the first place. But if he did exist, I wouldn't worship him because of that.
Well, you do
that's
worship. You do worship it, and you actually support it. You support the suffering of children. You just pawn it off today to have them develop the pain and the
well.
suffering that I have.
Let's
Yeah.
ignore the abortion argument. Let's ignore the abortion argument is secondary. I understand where you're going with, Jill. It's a good point, but it's the root of the problem here. What I'm trying to show is that when it comes to the atheist presentation of God as a quote moral monster, it's actually not true within the Christian framework, because in the end, justice is served for all people, and it doesn't look like it while we're here on this earth in this temporary space. But what is taught by Christ and the prophets is that at the end of the day, there will be justice for everyone. God is not moral, and I know you just responded to that. So, but to say that God is immoral for allowing it, well, first of all, we have to point out, and certain Christian frameworks aren't going to agree with me, but I don't think God has told us what to do. It's not God's fault if we cause suffering to one another. God has given us free will. This is how creation is established. This is the system that is within the framework of the essence of God's creation, and that contains free will. It contains autonomy. And if we choose to harm other people, then we can do that now, but it will cost us in eternity. I think the problem is solved by eternal justice.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna endlessly disagree and repeat ourselves on this point.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. But so I think to really reach a resolution, we need to get to the point of why would God allow it in the first place? So why would God allow evil people to abuse and violate vulnerable, defenseless people? And among every other horrible crime imaginable. And I think that it goes back to what I was saying. It could be, again, I'd have to establish this myself. There's according to God's knowledge, there's value in giving humans free will and autonomy above controlling them to make sure they do the right things. And once that has been established, well, then you get into what we're talking about, which is that humans are going to be able to make decisions that cause suffering to other people, even if it's horrible suffering. God has made the decision. that humans having freedom and autonomy to choose one way or the other is superior in creation to limiting humans in their ability to choose in various circumstances. So that's kind of how I look at it. And again, from our perspective, we can say, why would God allow that? But we're not God. We're limited. I think that according to the framework, God is the one who's omniscient. God who's the one who understands all the variables. God who is the one who sees it from the eternal perspective. So God knows what system is better for the long term than humans do. So sure, we can look at it and say, I don't understand why God would do that, but we have to recognize our own limitations as humans and that we don't see the full picture. God does. So we can question it all we want, but God knows why things are the way they are. And that's what I would go with.
Word.
Jill Thomas, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would agree with that. He knows the beginning from the end. We're just looking at it from a temporal perspective. But you run into a bunch of philosophical problems when everyone gets to determine which evil should be allowed. So I think
Yeah, I
I
agree.
mean,
Yeah, I agree.
You,
Yeah,
you can't have a system in which I have a say in which ones are allowed. That's
right.
I mean, all of them have to be allowed.
Right, exactly.
And the Bible
Exactly.
explains why God allows evil, because he uses it for good. So every evil that occurs, God is using for good, I believe. I don't believe that there's anything as gratuitous evil or evil that's just there or out there that God is not using and intending for good. So even the 3-week aborted babies that may not feel pain the same way you feel pain as an adult, but even they will be avenged, and God's going to bring good out of what happened to them, even though we can't possibly see it or even fathom what that possibly could look like or be. But I do believe that that's the case. He's going to turn every act of evil into good, the same way he did in Genesis 50 when Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers. An act of evil, he calls an act of evil. Slavery, he calls it an act of evil. Genesis 50.
Yeah, slavery is another one. I mean, I know there's a debate about slavery in the Bible, but I mean, slavery is pretty evil. So, like, are we just gonna like start like draw a line like evils that can't exist that God shouldn't allow? Like, where do you draw the line? Like, I mean, obviously some are more obvious than others, but at some point you're gonna reach a line where it's like is indentured servitude as bad as like is like what about envy is one of the 10 commandments. Am I allowed to like look at my neighbor's car, the shiny red Corvette he just bought and be like, yeah, I'd like that. That's kind of envying your neighbor's property. Like it's a fine line at some point. Like so, yeah, I think if you're gonna allow some of it, you kind of have to allow all of it at some point.
Yeah, I I don't know. I don't think that someone that's able to do something like create the universe is going to be subject to those kind of limitations, but maybe.
That
Yeah,
goes
and
back to what I
that's what I would say. That by evil actually is not it's something that has ontology. So it's not a monster that God created that's terrorizing people and terrorizing the world and causing all of these bad things. Evil is actualized by God creating. So as soon as God creates, because he cannot duplicate himself, okay, there are a lot of things God cannot do. That's why I think your definition of all powerful is not one that's found in Scripture or derived from Scripture. All powerful doesn't mean God can do everything. God cannot lie. He cannot create himself.
Yeah,
Okay?
this is
Because
kind of what we were talking about earlier. God
Yeah.
God cannot make. You might have missed that part of the conversation where we said God cannot make 2 + 2 = 5, which sounds
Yeah.
really outrageous. So, but it's true. There are certain, even for an omnipotent God who's all powerful, there are limitations.
Well, they're not limitations.
That's a contradiction.
But we have to be careful in calling them limitations. They're not limitations. For example, if I said that I cannot lie, that's speaking to my nature. Okay, it's not a limitation. I'm not trying to do it and I can't do it. That would be a limitation. Like I cannot play basketball. Why? Because I've tried to play it. But
okay, so like
that's not what it says.
I
cannot do it. It's not the same type of meaning.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
He's morally perfect. That's why he cannot lie.
Right.
A morally perfect being cannot lie. They have no reason to. They're all powerful. By all powerful, it means that there's nothing more powerful than him. So if you came and knocked on my door, for instance, and you had a gun, and I'm all powerful, I have no reason to lie and say I'm not in the room. I have no reason to.
Why wouldn't they just say the most powerful? They use the term the most high.
Well, all powerful or the most powerful, it's the same thing. It means there's no being that's more powerful than he is. It has nothing to do with what he cannot do or can do or cannot do.
Right.
I agree. It just seems confusing that would be the language that they chose instead of having them say, I'm the most powerful or I'm more powerful than all the other gods. He says, I'm all powerful. And we're kind of just jumping to a conclusion about what that means, it seems like.
Well,
I'm not. I'm going based off of scripture because there are things that he cannot do. So because there are things that he cannot do,
you're assuming he can't. You're assuming he can't do that.
Scripture says that he cannot do something. So therefore, that is fueling my definition of all powerful, not some other outside entity or outside concept. If the Bible says that God is all powerful, and in the next sentence it says he cannot do something, then I cannot define all powerful as being able to do everything. It must mean something else. So I searched the text to find out what it means. It means that there is no one's will is more powerful than his. Even Jesus says, not my will, but thy will be done. David prays the same prayer, not my will, but thy will be done. That his will, what he wants to do, cannot be overridden by any other power or authority. That's what it means. Biblically, that's what it means. So I'm not importing a definition into the text. I'm actually getting it from the text.
Yeah. And also, just to clarify, what I was saying earlier, and again, I don't want to put words in Joel's mouth here, but it sounds like he's kind of saying is that God being all powerful is true so long as it constitutes a sufficient good. So the way I would define it specifically is God is a divinely perfect intellect who is abstractly goodness itself. So the common good that we see is divinely the perfect good that we see is perfectly of God, and so God can do all things as long as it doesn't constitute a deficiency. If it constitutes a deficiency or a lack of something, then it doesn't constitute power at all, because that would constitute something that is lacking. So when we say things like, going back to the philosophical example of, can God create a rock that's too heavy for him to lift? The reason he can't do that isn't because he's not powerful enough. It's because God being able to create a rock that's too heavy for him to lift is a contradictory situation. And if it's contradictory, it doesn't represent the full extent of perfect good in his power. Therefore, he can't do it. So God is all powerful insofar as his power constitutes the perfect and sufficient good. If it's deficient, then it doesn't constitute sufficient power at all.
Yeah.
Can I give you another practical analogy? Really simple, really quickly.
Jill, before you do,
it'll take 1 minute.
Okay, go ahead, Joe. Go
Okay,
ahead, Joe.
two men, both are married. One can sleep around, one cannot. Who's more powerful? The one that cannot. Now, I'm not saying that. Of course, he can. We know that by his nature is that of a fallen nature, and even though he's led by the Spirit of God, he can fall into sin. But the one who cannot do it is not necessarily the one who's the weaker one or the one who's not. Because like the brother said, that's actually lying is actually because you're weak. You have to lie because you're weak. You're covering something up. You don't have the ability to change the situation. That's why you're lying. That's why we lie.
That is a very interesting point, Jill. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it's worth thinking about. I don't know. I just want to highlight this Richie Rich. How can I listen to an invisible deity? God has drowned me out since birth. Fatherless home. How broken does he want me to feel? So, first of all, the fact that God's invisible, that isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself. We can't perceive God. There might be reasons for that. So that's not necessarily a problem. And I want to ask, like, why should we accept that you aren't the one who's drowned out God? Like, and I know that's kind of like offensive to hear that, but did you ever ask yourself if you are the one who's drowning God out and not the other way around? Like, you're putting the blame on God. I think you need to look at yourself and ask, like, what are you? Maybe you're contributing to this sense of detachment. So, just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, I don't know, Andy. So a lot of things were said. Did you have anything you wanted to respond to, or are you?
I don't think the problem of evil conversation is really going anywhere. It's not. I feel the exact same.
Okay. Well, I think that a lot was put on the table, and there's a lot to consider. Honestly, like, I think that Christianity and whether it's true or not is a completely different question of whether it solves the problem of evil within its own framework. And what I would say is that within the framework of Christianity, wherein how I see it, God creates us. God creates us with a will. That will is autonomous, and therefore it would include the ability to direct our physical actions in ways that harm and hurt others, to make decisions that harm and hurt others. And you can do that while you're alive. Everything in this world is temporary. Everything is going to come to an end. There's going to be an eternal judgment. God knows that. I think that the system that makes God's judgment just, whenever that may happen, I think that God can look at us and say, "I gave you the will. I told you what you should and shouldn't do with it. You made the choices while you were alive, and now the consequences are here." So the people who were harmed will be given justice. The people who did the harming will be given their justice, and everything works out in the end. So to say that God is a moral monster doesn't put the whole picture into frame. I think when everything's taken into consideration, the system God has created makes complete sense and is completely just. But again, I know Andy has said that the conversation has, we're going in circles, but to me,
Yeah.
people are going to have their different perspectives. People are going to look at it. Honestly, it kind of does like perturb me a little bit that this is seen as a problem with God and God's nature and character, because I think
Well, I
I
think
see the
it.
solution.
Sorry.
Well, go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think, in my opinion, if we're making a case for God's existence and God is choosing that the way things are going to be and the way that humans act and blah blah blah, and it seems like a pretty strong indicator that he doesn't exist if children are suffering in that way.
How
Not
about
that
if
it
I
not that
argue?
it, not that it proves it, but I mean, I would certainly consider it evidence.
How about if I argue that evidence of God's existence uh, would be, or what if someone argued that atheist existing is a sign that God doesn't exist? Because if God existed, He would have rewired your brain, not necessarily to, maybe to molest, not to molest children, but also not to be an atheist. What if I added that caveat? What if I added that to
I,
my moral odds or what God should have done or allowed? That no atheist, so no babies dying and no atheists. How about that world? Would you say that's a
yeah, I
better
brought up
world
that point.
morally?
Yeah, yeah,
That's a better world.
absolutely. I brought up that point exactly what you said before. If God wanted us to believe that He exists, He would just convince us.
Okay, He would convince everybody that's
If He
ever
wanted
lived.
everybody to believe, yeah, He would convince everybody.
What if He didn't?
Then He doesn't want everybody to believe.
So what would you
What if?
conclude
Well,
about that, God?
hold on. Let me respond to that. The idea that hold on. Let me summarize here. Basically, why the fact that people don't believe is evidence that God doesn't care. Uh, Again, we're ignoring the fact that, and again, it's, you can't look at it, but people have a will, and they will block out the truth
Yeah,
if it's
But he's
inconvenient to
saying,
them.
well, he's arguing, why would God even allow that? Why would He not rewire everyone's brains to not harm children and also to believe God exists? So,
Because it goes back to basically, first of all, I think that one big problem here that's assumed, and I already said this, is that our basically our thoughts and our will comes from brain chemistry. So that's a big part of the problem, because our
right,
brain
but he's going
chemistry
to rewire. He's going to rewire the brain to whereby
the
dopamine does not.
no, the
It
structure of
actually,
the structure of the brain doesn't determine the thought. So our thought comes from our mind. Our mind is not as independent of our physical brain.
it's
So
not.
you
It's
would have
independent. You think?
yes, I do. I think that the mind
Okay.
operates
Well,
independent.
whatever apparatus or whatever's operating it, he's going to change it to whereby there is no need or there is no urge to do any evil act to children. So
But
that's the
you
world that he
so
wants God to create. A
so
world in which
we're acknowledging that God is controlling our thoughts and limiting our free will. So that's so
no,
Andy, what
no,
you're saying
no,
is
well,
you would
limiting that part of our nature. So God can, just like God did not give you the ability to fly, he could have also created humans without the ability to molest children, is the argument I think Andy's
well,
presenting.
yeah.
I think Thomas, go ahead. It looks like you want to say something.
Yeah. So again, I just wanted to say, just a couple quick points, real quick. So first of all, we can absolutely know for a fact that God exists. There's no question about it. Just by the observable world, the fact that anything that is in act is directed towards a specific end, and anything that's directed towards a specific end ultimately has to have an intellect, kind of like if you were to point an arrow at something, if the arrow has to get to its destination, there needs to be an intellect. We also know that everything is ordered towards a perfect end. Everything is naturally ordered towards a perfect end. When it doesn't reach that perfect end, you don't say, well, that thing reached its imperfect end. You would say that that thing failed to achieve its given purpose. But that also leads to the third point, which I think is prudent to the conversation we're having, which is that there are apparent goods and apparent deficiencies of good. So we're talking about a very serious topic. We're talking about molestation and sexual abuse. We're talking about all of these different things. Anyone can instantly identify that there is that is a deficiency, a radical, extreme deficiency of good. That's something in the observable world that everyone can notice that. We know in the observable world, we can observe things that are good and bad. For example, if you had a dog and the dog pooped on the floor and you came home and you smelt it, chances are you wouldn't say, well, that's just a delectable scent. You would say, no, that's a horrible, horrible, terrible smell. So the very fact that there are apparent goods and apparent evils, as we're talking about right now, proves the very existence of God, because it proves there had to be some intellect that ordered that thing to a perfect end, and that the things we're talking about in this instance lack the qualities of that perfect end.
Yeah. I don't see why things happening requires intellect. Like, is there intellect behind a meteor traveling through the universe?
Depending on whether it has a positive or negative impact, we can see apparently whether it's good or bad. And if we can understand naturally whether it's good or bad, we can naturally sense either a perfect good, which comes from a perfect intellect, or a deficiency in the good that thing is ordered towards.
So say it's going to, so if it's going to crash into a lifeless planet where nothing's going to get hurt, then it didn't come from an intellect. But if it crashes into a planet where there's life, then it came from an intellect.
Well, if it crashed into a planet where there's no lifeless, organisms, it still had some sort of impact or some sort of effect, and so we can make some sort of determination based on the origin of that meteor getting to that planet, whether that meteor was ordered towards a specific effect and then it went off track, and then that was the result of that was an irrelevant action, or if that meteor crashing was meant to go there and have that impact, and maybe it had an impact in other ways, like maybe there were other environmental impacts that we can't see in that moment. So I don't necessarily think that something that doesn't seem to have an impact in that very moment, I don't think that necessarily denotes that there isn't an apparent good or an apparent bad that can be detected by further observation.
So like,
I want to go ahead, Andy.
well, I just wanted to clarify. So like, assume we know all of the variables, and a meteor crashes into a planet. There's no life on the planet. Nothing gets hurt. All of the aftershock waves that disperse into the universe and affect other planets and stuff. No one gets hurt there. There's no life, and literally no bad consequences come from it. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just neutral. There's no intellect behind that.
Good question. Good question. So, what we would say in that instance is we would have to study what caused the meteor to go on that course. Was that a natural thing or was that an unnatural thing? And if it was a natural thing, we could say that there's ultimately a positive effect because that's ultimately what the meteor was naturally able to do. But if the meteor was not meant to do that, we could still say that there is a deficiency of good in that situation because the meteor had an end and it didn't achieve that end. Even if it has a very minimal impact, that meteor still had an end. And if it achieved it, then that's still a sign of an intellect. And if it didn't, then that means there's a deficiency in what that meteor, what good that meteor was initially ordered towards.
I would suggest that if you were around when the dinosaurs were killed off, you would say that God should not have allowed this because it probably was not a good, it probably was a horrific sight when those
Yeah,
poor dinosaurs were starving to death.
yeah,
But
you would think so.
the dinosaurs led to what? Fossil fuels. So now you can drive around in your brand new Lexus. but,
You're an asshole sometimes, Joe, but I love you.
but I'm saying that to say this, that you can't see down the corridors of time to see, and I don't want someone to clip me on this, but there is a good to come out of what you're experiencing now in the present and the temporal realm. We just don't have the capacity even to see it, but God knows. So we trust and believe, and we have faith. That's part of what having faith is, faith and evidence, because He's always answered and He's always done what He said He's going to do. So that's the faith that we have, the pistis and faith that we have in God, that He is going to turn this into good. We can't tell you how right now. We cannot tell you how He's going to do that. But I just wanted to respond to someone in the chat, Dirty Vomit, your little buddy, Leviathan buddy, Ace. I just wanted to let him know that lying is usually characterized by individuals with, part of the character of those people who have personality disorders like narcissism and low self-esteem and insecurity. People also lie for a need for attention. So lying is not an ability you want your God to have.
Yeah, I've been following Dirty Varmint in the chat. Dirty Varmint, I appreciate him because he's an independent thinker, and I think we need those. I think this is probably one where I actually disagree with him, though. I actually don't think he might be right, but to say that Jesus lied, I've looked at this before. I'm not sure he did. I'm not saying he didn't, but I'm also not convinced that he actually did. So Luke
Oh, he
8,
said Jesus lied. Oh no, I wasn't responding to that comment. It was another comment he posted earlier about.
He's trying to make the argument that Jesus lied. Hold on. So he says it's
Oh,
in verse. Yeah, let's take a look at
okay.
this. I want to take a look at this real quick. We're gonna go completely off course here for a second.
Oh no, I wasn't trying to take because I wasn't responding to that. He had said something in general about. Okay,
I was gonna do this anyways. Actually, before I do that, I just want to say another thing that needs to be said in regards to this idea of one thing when it comes to the idea that there's this horrible suffering being caused is evidence that God does not exist. One thing we gotta keep clear here is that the question there is, why is the system the way it is? And when I say the system, I mean creation. I mean the rules of creation. But when it comes to God, there's a question more fundamental than that, which is why does the system exist at all? So for there to be a system wherein these questions can arise, I think there needs to be a God to create the system that we can look at and say, I'm not sure I agree with this. So I think that the idea of why suffering is not as fundamental as how do we explain existence itself in the first place. So that's also something I wanted to throw into the mix, and people can respond to that. But I think to get a world where you can question why suffering exists, you have to have a world. And without God, I don't think you get a world. I don't think you get a universe. I don't think you get life. I don't think you get human beings who can harm each other. And you can talk about evolution. That's why I do the ID updates. I think I do a perfect job of explaining how evolution did not happen. The scientific community is absolutely wrong and or lying. And we don't get life without God. We don't get it through a process where, there was a chemical mixture in a pond, and then there was a single-celled whatever, and then there's just no, that's not science. There's a lot wrong with it, and so there's also that to take into consideration. All right, Luke 8:52. Hold on one second. What was it? Is that what he said? Luke 8:52. All right, let's take a look here. Let's see if my computer can handle this. And Jesus returned, the people welcomed him, for they had all been waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue. And he fell at Jesus' feet, and he began. That's from the screen share. I thought someone. And there came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue, and he fell at Jesus' feet and began to implore him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, and she was dying. But as he went, the crowds were pressing against him. Okay, I'm going to skip all this. While he was speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, Your daughter has died. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. But when Jesus heard this, he answered him, Do not be afraid any longer. Only believe, and she will be made well. When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter except Peter, John, and James, and the girl's father and mother. Now they were all weeping and lamenting for her, but he said, Stop weeping, for she has not died, but is asleep. And they all began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. Oh wait, did we lose somebody? Oh, we lost Jill. Okay, I'm not sure what happened. I definitely didn't boot him, but
I think Joel is still here. I can still see his profile on this page.
You can.
I don't see it on. I don't see
Yes,
it.
I can.
I'm seeing 3 contestants here. I'm not seeing Jill either on the YouTube or in the StreamYard. So it looks to me like he left. Anyways,
that might be. Maybe
so
it's just on my end.
So yeah, that's a little bit weird. Another thing is maybe you need to update your YouTube. And are you looking in the StreamYard or in the YouTube?
I'm in StreamYard.
Okay, weird. Yeah, that is weird. I don't know what's going on. In the StreamYard, for me, he's gone too. All right, so here's the question here. It says they know that she had died. The question is, could it just be that they think that she's dead, but Jesus is basically explaining to them that they're wrong? Because the text doesn't really say that she's dead. What it says is that they're saying that she's dead and that they believe that she's dead. Okay, it says they know she's dead, but could it be in the sense of they think they know she's dead, but really they're wrong? I don't know. I don't know. It's close. It's close, Dirty. I'm going to say that it's close. I'm not saying you're definitely wrong, but I don't think the text goes so far as to say that she actually is dead. I think the text says that the people in the room know that she's dead. But you can think you know something but at the same time be wrong. So I'm not sure about this one. Go ahead, Andy.
I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a delay. But it seems like they would have just said they thought she was dead.
Yeah, that would have been more clear. If you go to Mark, let's look at the Mark version of this. Second here. Give my computer a few minutes to. Where is it? While he was speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue. This is Mark chapter 5, saying, Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken. So yeah, we have someone saying she died here. So that doesn't say she's dead. It's someone saying she's dead. So that person could be wrong theoretically. Do not be afraid any longer and don't believe. And he allowed no one to accompany him. Blah, 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 blah. They came to the house. They came to the house and he saw a commotion, people wailing. The child has not died. They began laughing at him. So here, It doesn't. It excludes that phrase of "they knew she was dead." So only in Luke does that problem arise. Which again, it's significant. I'm not saying, but in Mark, there's no issue. In Mark, you can absolutely make the case that it never says she. The text itself never says she's dead. It only says that they said she's dead. So you don't have to. You can say they're wrong. In Luke, the problem is a little more complex though, because it says they knew she was dead, which adds more confusion. But I still think you can get away with saying that they thought they knew, but they really didn't in the end, and Jesus was correct. So it's a little complicated. It's a little complicated.
I also wanted to point out this verse always brought up a question of mine, and I just, or not a question, but I guess it always seems kind of strange that a family who's, I mean, imagine you're a family weeping over the death of your child. You're certain that your child is dead. You've checked for a heartbeat. You've checked to see if they're breathing. Like they've gone stiff. They're dead. You know they're dead, and somebody comes in and no miracle has happened yet, and they say your child isn't dead. I doubt that your reaction would be to respond with laughter. It seems like that doesn't seem realistic to me.
That is a good point. And what I would say to that is what we could be looking at here, and I'm not saying this is the case, just hearing your argument, it could be this is poorly translated, and it's more, again, I'm not saying it is poorly translated. I'm saying it might be poorly translated, and it wasn't laughter, but more like a sense of like outraged disbelief, or like the Greek word in the text might actually be the Greek word for laughing, but maybe there's a sense in which it's not like raucous laughter, but more of like a surprised disbelief, like a kind of a mocking, sense to it. I think that might be resolved by saying this is perhaps a poor translation into the English. But again, I can't say that with absolute certainty. I agree with you that most people probably would not laugh in this circumstance. So that is a bit odd. I agree.
Yeah, it seems like the response that you would expect would be to say like they were appalled or they were disgusted or they argued with him. They were sure that the child is dead, but it's like I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because Jesus was already the interpretation that I've taken from it to try to justify it is that maybe Jesus was already such like a famous figure in the area that they did it out of like I don't know what's the word, being starstruck basically.
And it's not impossible that they laugh. They just might be weird people. Like it's within the realm of possibility that these people are just very strange and they laughed. Like
Yeah,
we can't
yeah,
discount that.
true that. I agree.
I agree that would be a very odd thing to do, though. I don't think most people would react that way. So you're right about that. Like I can't imagine myself laughing in a situation if someone said that. But I also want to say that I'm not so. So when Jesus he only lied. So when Dirty Vomit is saying that's in reference to Jesus Christ. So Jesus only lied to console the parents, knowing that he would raise her from the dead, which isn't a sin, which proves not all lies are sins. I got to give it to you, Dirty Varmint. You are an independent thinker among independent thinkers. And that's valuable because not a lot of people think independently. A lot of people put their minds within the framework of a system and just go by it. But it's an interesting point. Again, when I read the text, I personally think that there are ways to interpret it, or maybe not necessarily interpret it, but just to understand it in such a way that Jesus isn't lying. It's a point of discussion. I can see your point though. I'm not saying you're absolutely out of your mind for suggesting this. It's an interesting point, but I'm not sure it's absolutely necessarily a conclusion from the text itself. But interesting.
Yeah. I was gonna say. Oh, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say. In regards to lying, yes, lying is a sin, but there's different degrees of lying. Ultimately, a lie becomes a sin when it is contrary to the will of a person, when it's contrary to the spirit of truth, because ultimately, truth is what gets us to our natural end. And so, if we act dishonestly, then we kind of act in contradiction with our own end. But there are some lies that don't contradict the spirit of truth. For example, in Nazi Germany, when people were hiding Jews in their attic and they were saying, "Oh, there are no Jews in my attic," they were lying, but that wasn't a lie that was a sin, because ultimately it wasn't the spirit of truth that they were protecting Jews in their attic. It was the fact that Jews were being killed in concentration camps that was against the spirit of truth. So that would be an example of a lie that isn't a sin.
Well, there's a couple points I'd like to make to that. First of all, one of the 10 Commandments is you shall not bear false witness. Now, there's a dispute about whether bearing false witness is synonymous and equivalent to not lying. Some people say that bearing false witness is a specific kind of lie, namely one that occurs in a court where you are accusing someone of something. And all there are actually people who say that some lies are permissible as long as it's not that particular kind of lie. Now, I think that personally, I think that bearing false witness covers every single statement that's knowingly false that someone will make.
I
And
agree.
the commandment is thou shalt not lie. So that would seem to include not lying to save another person's life. Now, as shocking as that may be, we have to figure out how we deal with that, because clearly I don't think that's what God meant, and yet that's how it's recorded. So it's actually a difficult problem, because like you said, in some circumstances the moral thing to do is to lie. So how do we get around the fact that we're commanded not to lie? You see what
Well,
the problem is.
you could put forth the
Right.
argument,
So,
like you guys.
Wait,
what I
let's Andy first, and then Thomas. So Andy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say you could put forth your guys' own argument from earlier that we just simply don't understand God's morality.
Okay. But God has given us morality, theoretically, in the Ten Commandments. God has told us not to lie,
Yeah.
and that would seemingly include not lying even when it's the right thing to do. Am I wrong? Like, I think this is an interesting point. Like, can I lie if it's produces what I perceive to be a moral good? Like, I don't think the commandment allows for that.
Yeah, yeah, you would think that it would include God saying, "Don't lie unless you're saving somebody."
Right, but yeah, like, so is there a like, if I lie to save the Jew in the attic, like, am I gonna get negatively judged for that? Because technically I'm lying and I was told not to lie. So how do we deal with this?
By the way, I can't
Imagine,
hear anything
imagine
Andy's
repenting.
saying. I don't know if that's just my stream.
Oh, really? Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
I
something.
just hear I hear you, and then whenever he talks, I just hear silence.
How about this, Thomas? How about you drop out and come back and see if that resolves the issue? Because sometimes these strange issues are resolved by dropping out and rejoining.
Sure.
Yeah, let's try that first and see if it does anything. You know, I've thought about this. If the commandment is to not lie, then what do I do in situations where, because we're assuming that that's God's morality. It's not that we don't understand. This is what God has revealed to us as moral, is that we should not lie. But as was just pointed out, there are clearly situations where lying can be a good thing. So this is an interesting one.
Right? Assuming that everything that wasn't given as a commandment is moral, though. you would conclude that slavery is moral.
Thomas, can you hear Andy now?
I can, yes, and I no
Okay.
longer see Jill, so I think that
Yeah.
resolved the problem.
Yeah, StreamYard, I think the problem is StreamYard is not a very good program. I think that's why my computer works fine for just about everything else, but when I boot up StreamYard, all of a sudden it just dies. And
Yeah.
and also there's a lot of ironing out that needs to be done for this program, but it's better than nothing. So
Yeah.
so what were you saying, Andy?
Well, I was just saying, these
Something about
commandments are
slavery?
supposed to be, yeah, slavery. You could include child trafficking, like those things weren't included in the commandments.
Yeah, this is why I think my solution so this is where I'm going to get into trouble with the more fundamentalist thinking Christians who might be watching or listening. But I'm not putting my ideas forth as absolute truth. I'm just saying this is what I think might solve the problem, which is that it could be that what we have been given in the original Testament is perhaps inaccurate. I'm not saying it's bad or wrong. I'm just saying it's inaccurate, and that Jesus' whole mission on this earth is to clarify, which he does perfectly, which is why I think the essence of Christianity is simply following what Jesus Christ taught to the exclusion of all other sources of information. Because I think it appears to me that Jesus himself questioned things that were contained within the Old Testament law. So this is again a really tricky issue for Christianity to navigate, and I haven't really seen a better solution. But the problem is that my solution requires casting doubt on you have some of the most retarded theology. Well, give me a better solution, Dub. Give me your solution. Let's think about how you solve the problem. Because so far I haven't heard you explain how you would solve the problem. You will double down on Jesus as God. See, you think here's part of the issue, Dub. You think that a human being is God. So you have to figure that. Well, what theological statement did I make that you thought was quote unquote I already told you the link is pinned, Dub. Can you not see the pinned link on the YouTube channel? The New Testament says he is both man and God. What?
Yeah, only John says he's God.
Right. Apparently he can't see the link is pinned. Are you on your phone or are you on a laptop? Because if you're on your phone, sometimes the phones don't show the pinned links or the pinned links. Yeah, that's the problem. If you're on a phone, I don't think some phones show pinned links. So unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see it on your phone. If you were on a desktop computer, you'd be able to see it. So the only solution to that is for me to post the link in the description, which I don't think I'm going to be able to do in real time. Maybe in the future I haven't really figured out how to do that actually. I'd have to post the StreamYard link in the description of the YouTube video so you could go into the description and read it. Some people do that. Let me try and do that real fast. You all talk amongst yourselves real fast. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that real fast.
Yeah, but I guess my response to a lie is ultimately man's speech is ordered towards a specific truth. Now, in some cases, the actions of a leader or the actions of a government can be ordered against a certain truth. So in regards to the Holocaust, the actions of the Nazis were against a specific truth. So therefore, if a person's speech was directed, let's say a person's speech was directed towards the Nazis or in favor of the Nazis, like let's say the person did tell the Nazis where the Jews were, while that would in theory be factual, that statement would be more opposed to the truth than, saying, there's no Jews here when there actually are Jews there just to protect the Jews. Because if you're doing that, if you're hiding the Jews or you're doing that to protect the Jews, ultimately, that is a truthful action, or that is an action that is in the spirit of truth. And so that lie can still be a lie that is in that can still be a ordered towards the spirit of truth. It becomes a sin when the lie that a person tells is ultimately against the common good, in which case it's not a truthful action at all. Like if you lie to embezzle money, well, ultimately your natural end is charity. So if you are lying to embezzle money, you are going against your natural end, which is against truth, which is why that lie that you're telling is a sin. But if you were to, let's say, your life depended on you lying, well, you preserving your life is the most rational and truthful thing you can do. And so if you tell a lie to save your own life, for example, I wouldn't say that that's a sin, because it doesn't have the effect of dishonesty.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I just don't see why we should synonymize rationality or morality with truth like that.
Another way to think about this is that when we look at, for instance, the Sabbath, it was interpreted that if you basically, like Jesus said, if you have a sheep go astray on the Sabbath, technically you going to find your sheep is doing work. Hold on one second, Dub. I'll let you in a second. Just mute you for a second. I want to make this point. But what Jesus said is that, basically doing good on the Sabbath, even if it's considered work, is what we're supposed to be doing. So Jesus clarified all this. The commandments are written in a way that are very rigid. It's hard to know exactly everything in all of its detail. And I think the solution comes from the fact that the whole reason for Christ is to clarify all this. He said that the commandments are to love God, love your neighbor, and everything else falls within this. So if we're commanded not to lie, it's under the umbrella, the system of we are to love our neighbor. Who do we lose? We lost Thomas. Okay. So the idea is if lying is not done in a loving, hold on, let me phrase it this way. If lying is the most loving thing to do, then we should do it. Okay? So that's probably how I would go about solving that problem. Okay, Dub, you don't have to respond to anything I just said. I'm just wanted to finish that point. But yeah, you were saying my theology is retarded. So what do you want to put forward that's better than what I'm putting forward?
Well, to even like put forward any idea about Jesus potentially being a liar is blasphemy, bro. That's blasphemy, because Jesus goes to the Father so that he can send the Spirit. So so you're saying that Jesus, who is potentially a liar, is going to go to the Father and then send the Spirit. The Spirit's going to come through Jesus from the Father through Jesus, who's potentially a liar, and he's going to lead you to all truth. How can you believe that from a potentially a liar? That makes no sense.
Well, first of all, I would say that there's a difference between someone who tells one lie and someone who is a liar. Okay, so that's probably how I would respond to that. But again, like, I personally don't believe Jesus lied here. That is dirty varmint.
Okay.
But you're
That's
right.
good. I mean, like,
The fact that I think it's a potential that he lied, I agree, might be a problem though. Because in my, you have to. I agree. Jesus has to be God's Messiah. He has to be sinless. And to me, lying is a sin. So this is a really tricky theological issue that kind of arises. Excuse me. So this is what I'm going to have to think about. It's kind of one of those things that's kind of like a detail that has to be worked out. I think the framework is generally that Jesus Christ is perfect from a moral standpoint. Now, in my perspective, it is possible that Jesus attained to moral perfection during the course of his life, and at certain points of his life, he was not perfectly moral. But at the time that this took place, he had already.
Hold on. Well, where are you coming up with this from? Like, where in the Bible are you pointing to so that I can get on the same page as you?
All right, let's pull. I'm gonna pull open the Bible real fast. Yeah.
Because
So
here's
there's
the
a couple.
problem. Hold on. Here's the problem that I'm having, because the last thing that you just brought up was talking about sleeping and maybe Jesus was lying. Jesus defined. I put it in the comment section. John 11 through 14. Jesus says the person's sleeping, but then he redefines what that actually means. He says the person's dead. That was Lazarus. So, I mean, that was such a non
Yeah.
factor. Like, it was crazy that you guys are even talking about that. I just found it to be kind of like off the wall.
The problem with that is, it says in the verse, she is not dead, but she is sleeping. So Jesus distinguishes between dying and sleeping in the very verse. So that doesn't really solve the problem.
It does, because John 11 through 14, it's the same idea. It says that he is sleeping, and then he says, no, I mean he's dead. So it's the same thing.
That's a different verse. That's a different book.
It is a different verse, of course it is, but we have to try to couple verses together to get meaning to it, or else we end up with contradictions, and we can't understand it.
I think that we should define what the commandment really is. It says that you shall not bear false witness against thy neighbor. You know, it doesn't just say thou shalt not lie. It doesn't say that. And Jesus didn't bear false witness against his neighbor.
No, well, okay. So your problem is going to be that if we're supposed to be Christ-like, and we know that Christ did not lie, what are you supposed to do then? Not lie. That's obvious.
Well, but that's the issue. We don't know that Christ didn't lie. In Luke 8:53, it says that Jesus did lie. It says he lied.
Hold on. Please do not wait. Don't speak over each other. You can argue all you want, but and I'm talking to Dub, not Dirty Varmint. Just wait till Dirty Varmint finishes speaking, and then I'm going to allow you both to speak. So,
Dirty Varmint? Okay, I got you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So now I know why, because Dirty Varmint was in the comment section trying to make comments that are just absolutely trollish. Now, Dirty Varmint, you're trying to call Jesus a liar, and I'm not going to allow that.
I'm saying that he lied. The Bible says it. Go ahead.
I think you both need to distinguish between a liar and somebody that can lie or has told a lie. That's the difference between a drunkard and somebody that got drunk one time. Do you understand what I'm saying? So between you guys, I'm staying out of it. But go ahead, brothers.
We also need to bring up the fact that it could have been what was called a moral lie, like A was pointing out earlier, like it might not be considered a sin if the lie was for a moral purpose.
Yeah, I mean, all he's
Right.
doing is trying to console the parents. They're grieving, and he says, don't worry about it. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. But it is a narrative fact in Luke that she was dead. It
But
says
he
she was
also,
dead.
Jesus, the centurion, the one guy that he healed the son from afar, if the person comes saying, hey, this chick's dead, and poof, without saying in the text, Jesus, God the Father heal her and put her into sleep where she is no longer dead, she is sleeping. And so that's why she gets up and says, oh, I'm hungry. Hey, Mom, what's up? You know, maybe he did heal her at that time from death. We don't. That's not in the text either. But I see what Dirty's saying with the I would like to hear from y'all. Where in the written Torah in the law does it say don't lie like Jesus did in this situation?
Right. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. It doesn't say that you shall not lie. It says that you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. It doesn't say that you shall not bear false witness against yourself. Like you know, like if someone asked you, "Did you eat my cookies?" It doesn't say that you can't say, "No, I didn't eat your cookies," even though you did, because you're not bearing false witness against your neighbor.
Bro,
Amen.
you are making the most ridiculous comparison I've ever heard.
And also, like if you've got Jews in your attic,
Dirty, let him go. We already talked. Let him talk for a second.
Okay, right.
You still are yet to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jesus lied about anything. So
the verse is in Luke 8:53, man. Where it says she was dead. It's a narrative fact.
Hold on, just wait a second. In your comparison, because that's what we have to do when we're reading the Bible, we have to compare other texts if they are available. John 11 through 14.
I'm not talking about John.
Oh, well,
yeah, go ahead and use John in this instance, and you'll see that it doesn't work.
Yes,
the verse,
it does.
No, I'm just saying, if Jesus says she is not sleeping, which means death, if Jesus says she is not sleeping, right? What does the text say again? She is not dead, she is sleeping. If she is not dead, she is dead. If you interchange sleeping with death, Jesus says she is not dead, she is dead. So it doesn't work in this instance.
Hold on. Let's pull it up on the screen because you're saying something. It doesn't sound like you're familiar with the verse, and I just read it like 5 minutes ago.
Amen on that, brother. Thank you for bringing it up. Seriously.
All right.
I kind of want to point out.
All right. So, okay. 1 second. So John 11:11-14. This he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples then said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. So then Jesus then said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. So you think that solves the problem, Dub?
Yep.
I disagree. I think like Dirty, well, I'm in agreement with Dirty here that there's a different context.
How so? Well, hold
on. Well, because let's go to if we go back to Luke. Excuse me, chapter.
Yeah, go back to Luke. Amen.
Sorry, my computer is slow. So it takes a little to load. So we're going to Luke 52. And Jesus said, so this is the problem for you. In Luke 8:52, Jesus says, stop weeping, for she has not died, but is asleep. So he makes a distinction between sleeping and dying here. So you can't say that he's equating dying and sleeping in this particular passage. So your solution in that respect kind of falls apart.
No, it doesn't, because you still cannot ascertain 100% for sure what he's actually talking about here. So you can claim that he's lying, but can you claim that in 100% certainty? The answer is no. And I never would,
because the narrator says she's dead. The narrator says that the people knew she was dead, and that's why they laughed at him. Because they know she was dead.
This is the verse right here. It's actually 8:53, which creates the issue. And okay, it says the text says, and they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. So this creates a small wiggle room, in my opinion, to say that the text doesn't say she died. It says they knew she had died. So is that the same thing? Like, I think it's disputable, in my opinion.
I mean, I would argue yes. It's the same thing because, like, down in like 55, it says that and her spirit returned and she got up immediately. And so if she wasn't dead, how could her spirit return? It would never have gone away. It would,
Yeah.
And so, like, it
That's
is
a
making
good
the point. It's making the point that she was dead.
I agree.
That's actually
Could I
a good
add
point.
something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, and I agree. It's clearly saying she was dead. It's a resurrection miracle, but I think that the one explanation for this could be like, and not to be disrespectful, making this kind of comparison, but in the same way that like a magician might hold a rose up and then reach into his hat with the rose and say, "Remember that rose I had? That's not a rose, that's a rabbit," and then pull a rabbit out. He's not necessarily telling a lie, and the people know that he's not lying. He's showing that he pulled off a magic trick, and I think maybe Jesus is doing the same thing now in this instance by saying that she was sleeping. He's just doing it as like basically a joke to add dramatic effect to the resurrection that he's about
Or to keep it, like you said, to keep it a secret. That very last line is jumping out at me. He instructed them to tell no one what had happened.
Right.
So the people are gonna know that he went in there saying she's not dead. That helps the case of he wanted to keep it secret.
Yeah, he's trying to trick the crowd into thinking that she wasn't dead.
I like that. I like that. It's a good discussion.
I mean, I think the issue is from the commandment that says, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor," and most people interpret that as "You shall not lie." Period. But it's not that. It's like if there were Jews in your attic and you're trying to protect them, and you lie and say there are no Jews in my attic, you are not bearing false witness against your neighbor. You're actually bearing false witness in favor of your neighbor. So we have to take the commandment for what it says. You
That's
shall
a
not
good
bear
point.
false.
That's beautiful.
You make a good point.
That's a good point. Here's the problem that arises from that. It legalizes immoral lies, though, because they're not prohibited. So, you see what I'm saying?
You can't. The law says specifically,
how does that work?
Like in the law that I try to follow, and I'm asking you guys for, hey, where does it say thou shalt not lie? But yeah, you can't defraud, and to defraud, you have to lie. You know what I mean? There are sins within murdering. I'm sure you're going to lie to somebody to murder somebody, or adultery. I'm sure you're going to be lying to your wife. But yeah, specifically, thou shalt not lie. We don't I don't want to say necessarily see that law.
You do have that there. Have you ever heard of the plumb line? Or there's other instances where it's not the plumb line. It's just like, I will raise up a standard. That Jesus is that standard. He didn't lie. He never did. Like,
I think he
not
did.
even what.
I don't think all lies are bad. I think if you're going to console somebody, tell them that their butt isn't fat. It's not evil.
Okay, let me give you an example. If one of your friends came up to you and he's obviously overweight and he's like, "Hey man, this chick just shot me down, man. Am I fat?" And you're going to tell him no. Is that going to help him?
Well, it's going to console him a little bit.
Well, I would say, where's the sin? Where's the sin? Where's the law against you saying that? Is all I would say.
I was interested in what A
said. A law for you, buddy. I'm not trying to do that, but what I'm trying to say is Jesus never lied. Either way, with what you're trying to say, like, oh, I didn't want to really hurt anyone's feelings. He wasn't there to not hurt people's feelings.
Okay, Doug. Was the girl dead? Yes or no?
Was the girl dead? She was dead.
So did Jesus say she's not dead?
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did. He said she's not dead.
It says it right there.
It's on the screen.
Then all I have to do, and you're going to call it probably changing the goalposts or whatever, spiritually she wasn't.
But it says she spiritually was because it says her spirit returned.
No.
Well, here's the problem. Dub. Part of the text says she's dead, and Jesus says she's not dead. So you have to assume it's being spoken of in the same sense in that context.
No, I can no, because I can assume that based on the fact that Jesus spoke in parables, and furthermore, like that's spoken back it's in Isaiah where it says like line upon line, precept upon precept, who will be taught, those just weaned from the milk. I will speak in parables, and basically I will have a stammer. Do you know what a stammer is? It's like truly, truly.
Yeah,
Somebody who repeats the same thing over and over again. It's a stammer. And then parables, it says, I will speak to you in a foreign tongue. Do you believe that parables are in a tongue? They are. And that actually the apostles confirm that. So you have a verse that in Isaiah, I forget which verse it is, but in Isaiah, it does say that. And who's speaking there? That's God speaking. So, you know, if you're a Unitarian, this is a verse that you have to deal with. Why are they writing down stammers in the Bible? Somebody truly, truly, I say to you.
That's only in the book of John, actually. In Matthew and Mark and Luke, he only says truly once.
So are you saying that you're willing to just burn the entire book of John?
Yes.
I just think the fact.
Yeah, too.
Exactly. You're willing to burn everything. You don't get it.
I'm not willing to burn it.
Not for that reason. It's for other reasons, but I personally think the book of John is false. It's probably 20% true, 80% false, in my opinion.
That's an extremely. I disagree with these guys, and I think that's an extremely mature and realistic take from you.
Well, thank you. You know, I mean, I wanted Ace to explain to me how I'm legalizing immoral lies when I say the Jews are not in my attic.
Well, it's not that that's an immoral lie, but if you're gonna if you're gonna define "thou shalt not bear false witness against neighbor" in that strict a term, well then at that point it's not prohibited to tell lies that are for personal gain or are immoral. So it would simply remove the restriction for doing that. Whereas the tradition, I wouldn't maybe say the traditional interpretation or the broader interpretation would include immoral lies. So we're going to have to say that if we interpret it your way, Dirty, it's okay to lie to a person in an immoral way. Like you can say, like you can tell somebody you're going to do one thing and do another, and it's not a sin. You know what I'm saying? Like, that creates that difficulty.
Yeah. I mean, is there like a malicious intent that has to be there? What if it's just like an innocent, you know, somebody's car broke down and you said, oh, it's not broken. And then it is broken, but then you just fix it quickly, you know, and you say, well, it's not broken. Look. And then you just really quickly fix the car. It's kind of the same thing.
I think that the problem is within. See, if it wasn't for Jesus's clarification, there wouldn't be an easy solution to this. But I think that the idea is Jesus said basically everything we do must be done in love. Okay, so if we lie to somebody with malicious intent, that's not loving. All right, so we can't do it. Basically, so.
Like Jesus didn't have malicious intent. He lied in love. He said he was consoling the parents. He's saying, "Oh, don't worry, she's not dead."
Bro, he's
consoling them, so it's out of love. No, you know what I mean?
It says, and her spirit returned. So obviously, her spirit was not dead. They just didn't know what he was talking about.
Well, again, Dub, you're getting into. And her spirit, well, death is the separation of the spirit from the body.
Exactly. So she was dead.
Yeah, she was dead physically, yes, but her spirit was able to obviously come back. So, whatever.
Well, death is always only physical, in my opinion. I
That's
do
your
believe that.
opinion, though.
I
That's
know.
your
Well,
opinion. So now you're reading things into the text and saying he's a liar. That
well,
doesn't make sense.
it's funny because this is probably one issue where St. Thomas Aquinas agrees with you and not me.
Really?
What's he say?
St.
Enlighten us.
Thomas's view is lying is absolutely always a sin. Now, he says there's a different degrees to that. Lying to hurt a person is a grave, grave sin. Lying to help another person, he would say that that's not as severe a sin, but he would say that it's still a sin. Now, I'm mostly going off of what Pope Leo the 13th would say about lying, which is ultimately that a lie can be moral if the object is truth. So, for example, when it comes to our example about the Jews in the attic, well, ultimately protecting those Jews, that is the object of truth. So in that case scenario, the person's words can signify truth, but that would be a deviation from St. Thomas. But I think I would probably agree more with Pope Leo on this one.
Well, what you're talking
Let
about
me.
there is very specific. That's very, very specific. Now, that would be like somewhat similar to saying, let your knowledge be high on righteousness, but be what is it? Be something about a serpent and a dove. You know what I'm saying? Like be as
Yeah.
wise as a serpent, but as gentle as a dove. So, and I think that plays in there. Now, that's a very, very specific case because you realize that serpents are here, so you're gonna kind of play their game. If it's that obvious, and you have somebody up in your attic that you know you're just trying to pay for a minute, then that's different. That's totally different. But
And I want to say that thank you, Dub. Sorry to kind of cut you off there, but there's a point I'm thinking. This is why I want to hesitate to say that Jesus lied, and really, or that you can be that there is such a thing as a moral lie, because that would mean that dealing in untruth is morally good in some circumstances. And to me, untruth is hostile to the nature of God. It's outside the essence of God, because God is truth. There can be no untruth in God's essence, God's moral purity. So you can't deal in untruth and be godly, in my opinion. I mean, to put it very bluntly.
that's exactly correct. So how are you even trying to bring forth a claim that Jesus was a liar in any manner?
Well, I think we're
I
looking
don't
at a
get it.
one instance of lying versus the noun liar.
I don't care what you're looking at. He never at any point was a liar, and I could prove it from the Old Testament. So
At any point, okay, I hear what you're saying, but please at any point did he lie?
No.
Okay, that's all I want. Okay, that's good.
So are you saying that Jesus was just incorrect when he said that she's not dead?
No, I'm saying that you are not able to understand exactly what he was talking about, because
That's a possibility.
The defense is that he is speaking in a manner that you just cannot comprehend.
I think I comprehend it fine.
Dirty, I think that is probably a solution, though. There is a chance Jesus was just wrong. He thought one thing.
Yeah, honest mistake,
I think that's better than.
Sorry.
It's not
My
ideal.
goodness.
It's not ideal, but it's better than saying he lied, in my opinion.
Right,
I'd rather.
We have to be careful not to show partiality to Jesus.
This is unreal. You guys are thinking in a manner where you're considering Jesus as being a liar, but then he's going to go to the Father and send the Holy Spirit, which is going to be in all truth, going to give you everything. So you're saying that somebody who potentially lies is going to send all truth to you. Okay. Good night, fellas.
Wait, Dub, before you leave, Dub, before you leave, you see, right now, Dub is hiding from the truth, and if someone doesn't want the truth, then they will, blind themselves to it, and that's what he's doing right now.
I noticed Jill
Dub
left.
That was a concession in my eyes.
I noticed Jill left right when we started talking about this.
I was just gonna say, like, as soon as things got spicy, Dub popped out. That's a concession.
Yeah, I wanted to see his explanation of verse 52, which is clear. She has not died. She is asleep. If you're saying John 11:11 through 14 is asleep is dead, you cannot insert dead in that text. She is not dead. She is dead. I wanted to hear his explanation on that. It's like, oh man, he left. What a bummer. I wanted to hear what. Yeah, bummer he left.
I don't know why I don't know why you would try to fight the obvious, like, either. Like, he's clearly performing a resurrection miracle. He did the exact same thing to Lazarus. It's exactly what he's doing. Everyone that reads it knows he's performing a resurrection on the girl. Why are we
even when he
gonna
sent out the 12? Yeah,
dead.
even when he sent out the 12 and the 70, he said, "Don't tell anyone I'm Messiah." So I see how he's saying, "Don't tell anybody. I just raised this girl from the dead." And Lazarus, everybody came. This was right after he says, "You're going to have to eat my flesh and drink my blood," and everybody left him. But everybody came back after he raised Lazarus. Well, that's only in John. We got to throw that book out.
Yeah, I think denying the miracle would be the most blasphemous take, would be to deny the miracle.
Yeah, amen. Point.
What about the Old Testament verse where the angel asks God, is it okay if I send a lying spirit into Ahaz or whoever, and in order to sabotage him or whatever? And then God was like, yeah, go ahead and do that, Do you guys remember that part?
Yeah,
that's a good point.
And another thing he was asking about, like, to Mike's point about there's a difference between someone who tells a lie and who is a liar. Like, let's say at one point Jesus lied, but here's the point. He was asking, well, Jesus is God, so he has to be perfect the whole time. Well, here's the thing. This is Luke 2:52. I've shown this verse before. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. So for him to increase in favor with God would mean at some point he was not in favor with God, which means he wasn't obeying God necessarily.
What passage is that?
This is Luke chapter 2, verse 52.
Okay.
So this would
That's a good point.
And again, I'm not operating in absolutes here. There may have been a point in Jesus' life where he wasn't obedient to God perfectly.
Yeah, and I would differentiate at John the Baptist's baptism, but you guys would probably say throughout his entire life. But yeah, please continue on that thought. I like that.
I'm just saying
about the baptism.
There is room. I mean, this verse creates a lot of problems for the Trinitarians, in my opinion, or the people who deify Christ, because how can you be God and, first of all, increase in favor with God, which necessarily implies that at one point you were in less favor with God, which you are.
Well, this is his. He's going through puberty at this point. I mean, chronologically, Luke 2 is like him growing up. This is way before John the Baptist.
So could Jesus have lied in his youth? Could Jesus have sinned in his youth?
I say yes.
That's my interpretation too. Yeah, I agree. I think he sinned before. I think that's what the baptism is trying to show, that through the baptism Jesus became holy and, without sin, or completely righteous. Like faith, it's symbolism that the baptism brings righteousness.
Interesting. All right. Well, here's the thing. We're getting close.
We got to answer.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
You have to. I didn't hear your answer. You have to end dirty too. Do you think Jesus was sinless prior to John the Baptist as well, like all his life? You know what I mean? What was your guys' opinion? I didn't hear you two's opinion.
Honestly, I'm undecided.
Same here.
I very much hesitate to say that Jesus sinned during his life, so I'm not going to go there. But I will say that verses like this seem to open the possibility that that's the case. And that's as far as I'm going to go for right now.
Like for me, I think Luke starts at Luke 3:1. So the fact that this is in Luke 2 kind of makes
That's
it so I don't take it seriously. But this verse would seem to suggest that he wasn't completely 100% sinless, but I want to believe that he was sinless all throughout his life, just because of my theology says that it's possible for humans to be sinless, and so I'm rooting for Jesus that he never sinned.
Well, in my theology, all humans can become sinless, but not necessarily during their entire lives. So I think there can be a point, like, early in your life where you're a sinner, you're a liar, you're whatever, but you repent and you become sinless. So if you're sinless, you're as sinless as Jesus Christ. Like,
I agree with
there's
that.
nothing more. There's nothing, like, if you're sinless, there's nothing more perfect than perfect. So you reach the same moral equality with Jesus Christ at that point,
Even if you sinned in the past.
even if you've sinned in the past, your current righteousness is how you will be judged. Otherwise, otherwise the people who say, well, there's no hope for us at judgment are correct.
Right.
On our own merit. Because if you sin once in your life, then you are done, unless you can repent and become sinless.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, if you repent, like if you stole something, but then you paid it back 5 times, or however many is required, then you have become sinless again. You've repented and you've corrected whatever wrong you did.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of agree with you too, Dirty. I think that purgatory comes into play as well. I think that if we have unpaid sins in this life, then in the hereafter we'll have to pay for them.
Yeah.
Now you're talking.
I mean, there's in the 10 Commandments, it says that taking God's name in vain will not go unpunished, and to me, it's like, okay, that doesn't mean you're going to hell, but you might go to purgatory for that.
Right.
Yes, you're
That's
exactly
where
right.
you're lying at.
In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 14 to 15, King David repents after he murders Bathsheba's husband and then has an affair with her. And he's told by God, he says, okay, I forgive you, but there's still a debt that remains. And then his unborn child dies because of the debt that remains. So there is still a sin debt, because sin ultimately results in unsatisfactory. It ultimately creates an act that is against God, that is not satisfied. And ultimately, we read in the book of Psalms that salvation is ultimately perfect satisfaction. So if something is not satisfied, if a sin is not satisfied for, it's got to be satisfied either in this life by indulgences or in the next life by purgatory.
Well, I don't know about the indulgences thing, but
I about piddled my pants when he said that. But no, go ahead.
But I will say, like, the way I look at it, if you commit a sin, you have to pay for it. Now, the only way that God will forgive you is if you repent. So if you don't repent, not only you basically won't be forgiven, but if you do repent, you will pay for your sin, and then God will forgive you. It's kind of how I view judgment. And
that's why I think the thief on the cross was paying the price. I don't know why you kill a thief, but he paid his price on earth, and he double repented. So that's why I think it's okay where people have all this other discussion. But I'm dying to hear Dirty Varmin's comment on what some of these brothers already had to say.
What?
Oh, about... on the what was he saying on the? Now he was speaking truth before the indulgences, but when he said that,
well, if I could just comment real quick, if I could just respond real quick, I know you
take your time,
you talked about the thief on the cross, how he paid his debt on earth. That's all that we would consider an indulgence to be, is a sin that's paid off on earth. Doesn't have to be a monetary sin. I mean,
the indulgence. Yeah, St. Peter's Basilica was built on indulgences, which is a completely different thing. I understand now. So my apologies.
No worries. So basically, the way the Catholic Church defines an indulgence is it's defined as merely a means of paying off a debt on earth. Now, I think with the St. Peter's indulgence, what happened there was someone, I think there was like a priest, and he came out and he said, well, we'd really like to build a church so that all these people that come to Rome can see this church, and we think that's a charitable act, and we'd like you to pay for that if you want to. And so they did. In that specific instance, paying was considered an act of charity. That doesn't necessarily mean all indulgences are like that. That was
But you
just
got
one indulgence.
to tell the
But it led
entire
to
truth. You have to
confusion.
tell the entire truth. If you could pay for a future sin, you could. In fact, they've done the calculations for like $6. You could pay for the future rape of a child. You could prepay your sin away. Isn't that the truth of the St. Peter's Basilica indulgences?
I want to say that's the third time that word has been used. Again, that's to remind everyone, YouTube will flag the video and throttle it for a certain language. So let's just be aware of that. I'm not. It is a valid English word, so I'm not going to say
Yeah, I mean,
But,
I think YouTube has kind of changed their policy on that, like freedom of
Okay.
speech thing. I'm not sure, but I think that they're being forced to change their policy on that. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'll say
But
my
just to
sorry.
Let's not
clarify,
use that word.
just to
My sorry
clarify,
there. My sorry.
an indulgence cannot pay for a future sin. Just to clarify, an adult. I'm not trying to like start a fight here. I'm just clarifying the position that I take on this matter. A position, the indulgence can only remit a sin that a person has already forgiven or has already committed in the past.
So I got a question about indulgence. Well,
hold on, Dirty. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to shut things down. So, if it's a quick one, maybe go ahead. But
well, it's all right. It's kind of a dumb question.
Let's hear it then.
But,
I want to hear it.
It's like, okay, if I stole a pack of gum, right, and I never repent of that throughout my entire life, but sometime during my life after that, I get beat by some person 5 times a day, every day for 10 days. Is that an indulgence? Will that pay for my pack of gum? Will
if
I be
you get
forgiven
beaten up
for the
by a
pack of gum?
person?
Yeah.
Well, if the intention was not to remit a sin that you've already committed, then the answer would be no.
Okay. Yeah, it would be an unrelated beating. It's not related to the pack of gum at all.
Right.
But I still did suffer some unjustified evil against myself.
Right. So that would not be that. Ultimately, an indulgence the object of an indulgence has to be not only a debt but also charity. And if you don't will for a beating to happen, then that wouldn't count as an indulgence. I mean, otherwise, anybody that got killed in a mildly violent way would be forgiven in an indulgence. I mean, if that were the case, you could literally have an unpaid sin debt and you could get hit by a bus and that would count as an indulgence. But that's not the position we take. We take the position that you must, the indulgence you must do in full knowledge and in full will.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks.
Dub has rejoined us. Dub, I'm gonna give you we're shutting things down, but if you have something to say, you have a couple minutes. So what is it you wanted to say? You're muted, by the way.
I just wanted to quickly point out. I'm pretty sure that we can all agree that Isaiah 53 is speaking about Jesus, correct?
I hold that position.
No, we can't agree on that, but
we can't. Okay. So Isaiah 53:9, for those that do agree on that, you'll see that he wasn't a liar. So that there was never any deceit found in his mouth. So that just ends the conversation. However, yeah, I mean, because it's really, I mean, it's kind of annoying when people.
Yeah, if you believe in Luke and you bring up that passage in Luke 2 that you just brought up, A's
Luke
philosophy.
2:52. Wait, Luke, is that Luke 2:50? Wait, is that Luke 2:52?
Yes.
I'm not sure, but that one denies it. Basically, disqualifies Jesus from being Isaiah 53 because it says that he grew in stature and in reputation among men,
brother.
which Jesus didn't.
I know your opinion. Okay, now here's mine.
All right,
that
let's
is
hear
talking about Jesus Jesus being the mediator between God and man. It's called the first fruits, homie. God
Oh,
and
man.
man. He grew
That was-
favor between both God and man. It's
That
called
was
the
disappointing.
Yeah,
mediator.
but Isaiah
my friend.
53 says that he was hated by all men. And he didn't
Isaiah
grow in
53:9
favor
says
among
there was no deceit found in his mouth.
Yeah, but Isaiah 53,
All right,
5
good night,
or whatever
Good
says
night,
that
boys.
he did not find favor in men's eyes at all.
He all right, so they will accuse
That was awesome.
they claim they go by the Bible, and then they completely make something up out of completely nowhere to justify their interpretation of things. So who's worse? Me who says questions portions of the Bible, or them who just insert whatever it is they want into the text to justify their belief system? I really don't know.
Well, I just wanted to say he was wrong about the girl being dead. Rage quit, comes back, is wrong about this, and then rage quit immediately.
Yeah.
Hey, did you ever try that volume thing? Did you get that fixed?
I wanted to do that today. Maybe we can try.
Do you got a video?
Yeah, let's pop up. Let's do that real quick. For people who don't mind to indulge me, let's see if I can fix this. Let's go back to let's go to the Matt Slick videos. Let's listen to a little bit of our friend Matt Slick here. Hold on, give me a minute to set all this up, because I want to see if I can fix the volume.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would help the audience a lot,
Yeah, because I know I see a lot of people turning in the video, and then they immediately tune out because it's like I can't hear what's saying. So I understand that as well. It's like if the audio makes a big difference to whether you want to listen to something or not. So
yeah,
this probably needs to be fixed. All right, so let's see if we can find. I have a video pulled up. I'm gonna play it, and y'all tell me. All right, hold on. I pulled up a random Matt Slick video. I have no idea what they're talking about, but this is just going to be for testing the audio, because this was what I was reviewing the other day. All right, So I'm going to play the video, and I want you to, see how loud it is, and I'm going to try and turn up the volume and tell me if it gets louder. So this is going to be the initial volume. So let's listen to it for a couple seconds.
We know that we can't that belief.
I mean, it's super choppy, but I can tell it's really low volume.
Hold on. Yeah, I want Matt Slick to talk for a second.
Is
All right, so let's all. All right, we all hear that, right?
And then
Yeah.
Is it kind of low?
Yeah.
Oh, very low, very low.
All right, so I'm gonna. All I want to try and do is. So I'm not worried about what's being said. I just want to see if we can turn up the volume. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna open up the mixer. I'm gonna raise some of the volumes here and see. Let's see if it goes up.
They can name themselves. So the issue.
Yep.
Was it louder right there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that worked.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to. Okay, so there is a solution to this problem. I just have to iron it all out. But okay, that's good to know. So,
Cool.
One of the things, and you know what, Dirty Varmint, that was all you. You were the one who
That's cool,
made
man.
the recommendation, and so so I appreciate it. That I would not have figured that out if you hadn't made that comment. So I really appreciate that. The problem is, some people have also let me know that my audio is extremely loud. So I'm going to have to figure out a balance between my audio and the video audio. But hopefully, maybe I'll do a stream in the near future where I try to just do an audio stream. And if someone comes in, I can kind of ask them if things are all right. But at the very least, I know that I can turn up the volume on these videos.
Yeah, I think you got it fixed, man. I think you did it.
Oops.
And then what they want to do to reach.
Can you
Alright,
try to
so
go
that is a little
even
bit loud.
louder, or is that as loud as it goes?
I think I can go louder than that. Was it still
Cool.
not very loud enough?
Well, I mean, it was definitely louder, and it was loud enough, I think. But I was just asking, maybe you could like go super loud. But no, you
Maybe
were
I'll go
fine.
okay, so that's better at least. So I think in the
Yeah.
future, if I do video reviews, I will be able to have better audio, which is a good thing because the audio's been
Awesome.
pretty bad. So thank you, Dirty Varmint, for that.
No
All right,
problem.
what we're
Man.
gonna do now, we are gonna do. I'm actually gonna turn it back down because now it's really loud for me. So this is gonna be something that I'm gonna have to figure out. But let me see, where is that? Oh, there it is. That's right. Go to the mixer. I'm gonna take things down to where they were. Okay. All right. Those things that should be back to where they were. Um, who did we just lose?
None of your
We
business.
just lost. Oh, we lost Mike. Okay. Well, we'll do closing statements. So basically, we'll go in reverse order when we join. So, Dirty Varmint, you were the last one to join, so you will be the first one to take a minute or two to just say whatever's on your mind before you go.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I appreciate you having the stream. I always enjoy your streams. There's just not enough time in the day because I kind of wanted to talk to Andy a little bit about Job and the problem of evil and stuff like that. But I enjoyed listening to the show. So next time,
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Dirty. All right. I believe actually, Andy was the third person to join, or the third person. So Andy, if you have anything you want to say, feel free to do so right now.
Hmm. Not
You don't
really,
have
I
to say
guess.
anything. Okay.
There were good conversations. I just I'm still searching for some sort of something to convince me that God is real. I'm on the fence, I guess. But you already know this, but maybe others don't. I've been praying regularly to God, and my prayers are indeed genuine. So maybe I'll come around and see things from your guys' side eventually. I'm certainly keeping an open mind. As much as it seems like I oppose you guys, I more or less oppose the atheist community even more.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah. If you're keeping an open mind, that's all you can do. These are difficult questions. So yeah, there aren't easy answers. But hopefully my channel will continue to at least be something to offer for consideration for you. So
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
all right, Andy. Thank you for,
All right,
and
take
also,
care.
yeah, it was a good conversation. You raised some good points and generated some good discussion. So thank you for that. So all right,
Mhm.
all right, Thomas. Did you have any closing remarks or statements that
Well, everybody who's in the chat who's Christian, please pray for Andy, in his spiritual journey. Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me on again. If anybody's interested, I recommend reading the Summa Theologica. Yeah, that's just about it. Thanks.
All right. Cool. Thank you,
Talk to you
Thomas.
soon.
All right. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation. A lot of interesting points being made. The problem of evil, to me, I think the Christian framework in general solves all the problems, if not from a temporal standpoint, an eternal standpoint. I think that you can argue whether God and judgment are real things, but within the framework of the system itself, according to Christianity, they will take place. So everything that's evil that happens in this world, there will be justice done. So I really don't think you can claim God as a moral monster or God. This is because God has created mankind. The total framework is God has created man with free will, and this is why I think free will is necessary. Because if you don't have free will, like some Christian systems don't, then you really do run into these serious difficulties raised by skeptics and atheists about the problem of evil. And you can't really take the route I do, because free will no longer is an explanation of why evil exists in the universe. You have to say that God literally determined that that would happen, but that makes God the cause of evil, which makes God evil. So this is really, really tricky for some theological systems within the umbrella of, quote, Christianity. But for me, I believe in free will and an indeterminate future. So we as humans, with our free will, determine what the future is. The future is completely unknown. I mean, you can predict what might happen, and this is what God does, but it's unknowable because the decisions haven't been made yet. So we have free will, and that solves the problem of why people do evil things, obviously. Why does God allow it? Well, because, first of all, God has, in his wisdom, which is greater than ours, determined that humans having free will is superior to humans not having free will. And God knows that at the end of the day, justice is going to be served. So the evil people, yes, some of them are going to get away with their evil in this world. They're going to live their entire lives getting away with whatever evil they did, whether it was a little bit of evil or a lot of evil. And some of them are absolutely going to get away with it in this world. But nobody gets away with it in the end. In the end, in the Christian system, there is justice. There is perfect justice. For every evil that is done in this world, there will be perfect justice served by a perfect God. So God, within the Christian framework, cannot be seen as a moral monster, as atheists claim. Now, you have to go about establishing that God really exists and that there's really a soul that will be judged and things like that. But within the framework as it exists, I think there are solutions to that. Eastern Thomas is an interesting figure. I appreciate our conversations. I really would like him to kind of not commit himself to a system. Like, it looks to me like he's committed himself to Thomist theology, which is very interesting to me. But why? I can understand saying, like, this is what St. Thomas Aquinas said, and it seems reasonable to me. But to put any person as an authority and say that, well, and I guess he did say he disagreed with St. Thomas in some regards, but why even claim to be a Thomist in the first place? Or I guess you could ask the same question about why claim to be a Christian, but the idea is that Christianity is what is the foundation of the truth. Thomism is going to be a subset of theology within Christianity. It's the same thing with Mormonism and Calvinism and Lutheranism. These are kind of things that we should try to avoid. These are divisions. We should say that we're Christians, but our theological perspectives may differ within Christianity. Again, I'm just kind of throwing this out there. Like, I think that ultimately we should think of ourselves as Christ, or the ultimate idea is that Christ is the ultimate authority. Now, we can look at what other people said, but I think it's kind of dubious to label ourselves in these different ways. I think that, especially in some of these cults like Mormonism, you're really almost committing yourself to a different religion entirely. And I think that they don't admit that, but that is kind of what's happening there. Again, I'm going to close up shortly. I just want to say that, again, everything I'm trying to get to in this stream is for the propositions I put forward. God exists. God's going to judge us. Our souls exist, and obedience to God is necessary. And within Christianity now, there are a lot of Christians who don't think obedience to God is necessary. That's really the ultimate problem I'm trying to solve. The two main problems are the existence of God and salvation itself. And sometimes I dabble in the Trinity, but in other things. But really, the solution I have found to get back to the idea of Christians understanding that they need to obey God is to put our faith solely in the teachings of Christ, because that's exactly what Jesus Christ taught. It's these other accumulations which have distorted the picture and made us think that we're saved by faith or we're saved by the blood of Jesus Christ paying for our sins. These are dangerous ideas. These are ideas that lead to people not thinking they have to obey God. There's no absolute moral framework by which we must abide. The solutions I have found are controversial, but nevertheless they solve the problems and therefore, in my mind, establish the ultimate truth. So whether they actually establish ultimate truth is a question, but to my investigation, they do. So I'm going to continue to put these forward until shown otherwise. Anyways, like and subscribe if that's something you want to do. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for everyone who participated. Until next time, thank you. Goodbye.